Yeah, it didn't for a while, and I do again.
I guess you guys can see over here. It's kind of hard to see over this book, but so. Feel free to jump up and walk around and get close. When I teach, I have people sit right next to me and look over the top of me. I'm Jeffrey, by the way. So. What was your name? Bari. Bari Precious. Nice to meet you, Bari.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm taking a day out to watch somebody else.
Gotta get the first couple pots out of the way, you know. These are always the hard ones for me. I haven't thrown for a few days. So.
You haven't slept in a few days.
I have not slept in a few days. Total probably maybe 8 hours in the last few days. Wow, this stuff is super buttery. Oh, I've been throwing with smoother stuff lately. I've been throwing lots of porcelain, but I may switch back and forth. You know?
So I saw you, yeah, you can't see because
Yeah, it's gonna be hard to see over this bucket.
You want a smaller bucket?
Yeah, maybe a smaller bucket. Maybe just fill this one back up, and I can use that to widen my end to it. And then somebody will be able to see over the top of it. 'Cause it's,
not me, I
Sorry, what?
She teaches I teach
Oh, okay, that's how you measure them out. Are you wanting to make them all a similar size, or do you just measure because you measure? I just kind of.
what was the question?
Okay, I saw you measuring your play balls out,
Uh-huh.
weighing them.
Uh-huh.
Do you weigh them because you want them all to be similar size, or are you making them?
Oh, to start with, I mean, I have set weights that I sort of use. For my bowls, I only use about a pound. Okay, and for my mugs, I use a pound or less than a pound. So I've started to be able to get quite a bit out of my clay, and if I use much more than that, they get really large. So I have to be a little careful. But yes, there are certain things that I do measure. I can always toss things on the wheel and just throw, but I guess it depends on what I'm doing. If somebody wants a set, then I definitely measure. If it's just me throwing for me, I'm personally kind of a.
There's no wire there.
There's no wire there.
It's over here.
I'm personally kind of one of those potters that makes a lot of like cousins instead of brothers and sisters. That things are close, but they're not the same. And I like that. If you come over to my house and you eat with me, I've got tons of pots, and nobody gets a set. Okay, everybody gets a lot of really different pots, and I find that to be very enjoyable. Or you have a mug that you pick out because you like the feel of it, and not so much because they all look alike. So this is going to be another bowl. It's going to be a little bit bigger.
What's the clay you're using?
This is the deep red from L&R. So
Is that the mid-fire?
it's a mid-fire clay, so cone 6. I'm a cone 10 guy. We fire predominantly cone 10 where I work. And so we do have, we can fire cone 6. We got plenty of buckets of cone 6 glaze. I personally just don't like it that much, I like the atmosphere in the kiln, even in gas kilns that allow you to do some specialty things. Whereas you kind of miss that, I think, in cone 6. Now there is some really cool stuff. I think just above cone 6, like cone 7 and 8, like where you start doing oil spot firings, air spur firings, where you're doing controlled cooling and microcrystalline stuff. But cone 6 really isn't what I choose to use. So,
What I hear.
Oh, yeah, that's our district standard is the white earthenware O6.
there's nothing wrong with that. It's just, one of those things
Well,
that,
it's, doesn't take as long
uh,
to fire, it's less expensive, the glazes are pretty predictable,
Sure.
So, kids see some of the higher stuff, and why do you look like that? You gotta pay more to do that.
yeah, you do. You gotta pay more, you gotta have big kilns, you gotta do all these
And we
things.
just don't,
It's really hard,
so,
I went to grad school and I had all the toys in the world. And in school I had all those toys, and then I got out of school, wow, got an electric kiln. What am I gonna do with this? We used to firing kilns for humongous. And,
packing and playing Jenga.
yeah, I always refer to it as Jenga myself.
That's funny. I just see the kills right now. I was gonna unload today, but
Yeah.
I pride myself on my packing.
I went ahead and checked mine this morning. It's almost-
I did too. I checked my, it's like things inside of things. There's some old line.
So-
But I got
Okay.
two classes worth of work done. One firing, so yeah. Plus some of my.
So in the beginning, I'm just gonna throw a couple mugs and a couple bowls, just to kind of get myself into, throwing mood. I can only jump on and throw really quickly, but the first couple, as I said, are always pots to sort of just get out of the way. And then the real stuff comes after that. So I do throw really thin. I try to get the most out of my clay. I also throw really thin because I use really thick glazes. And I never really viewed myself or thought of myself as the person that wanted to spend all their time doing glaze testing, but lately it's been that way. I found some very interesting things, read some books, and I've had control of a kiln a really fine gas kiln for over a year. And I fire it sometimes 2 to 3 times a month. So, I have a chance to test glazes just constantly. And really, I think that sort of leads back to that question where it's, do I weigh things and, one-offs versus sets and those things. I like everything to be individuals. And if I'm not testing things, if it's not a test to me, sometimes I'm uninterested. If I'm not trying to push the balance of that cup or what may run off the side of it as far as glaze goes, then I'm really not that interested. I'm always looking for new combinations. We have, 30 glazes probably in our studio. And so I'm playing with them, making new ones. I run a fairly well-equipped clay facility in Joplin called Phoenix Fire Park. And we do classes. I teach 5 classes a week, not twice a week, but just once a week, So, and we have, I would say, a fair amount of students. It could always be better, but I have enough students to where I can firework all the time. So, all right. So at any point in time, you guys feel free to ask questions, ask me anything. I'm not shy. And if you guys want to see anything in particular, let me know. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw lots of pots. I tend to manipulate lots of pots. I tend to bend them around. I tend to make them very fluid, I think. I like them to move when you spin them and not just be right in the middle like this one is. I like to come in and do some nice marks to them. And then I'll come back in afterwards, after they've dried, and do some more marking and some more manipulating of the surface. I do a lot of pressing and stamping. bottoms. I actually have to touch every little part of my clay. Every little piece has to be in some way touched or addressed. A lot of people don't look at the bottoms of their pots so much. And some people don't even bother to clean them up that much. And they just use their thumbs or whatever on the bottom. I have to put feet on almost everything. I have to put handles on almost everything. I have to, lately I figured out a way to glaze the bottoms of my pots. I don't know if you've looked at any of the pots over there, but spend some time with them. And you'll notice I do a lot of pressing. And I do a lot of stamping on the bottoms. And so that allows me to get glaze underneath, which, you know, I love.
I'm gonna kind of kiddos with the pottery and everything, so that
Sure. Sure. Okay, so this is probably a little bit too much clay for a mug, but I'm gonna make it a mug anyways. Here we go.
never too much stuff.
I have to be careful, otherwise all my pots end up really large. And some people like large pots and some people don't. So I've been able to get quite a bit out of my clay.
Well, you mentioned that you throw so much thinner. Anyways, it's funny, but you said, well, do I use a rib? Well, yeah, I use one or two, but you've got like a whole sort.
Yeah, I do, and they all do
So I'm
different
watching
things.
that, yeah.
So they all do lots of different things. And when I throw, I use metal and wood ribs. There's a couple ribs I wish I'd actually brought. And depends on what I'm doing. See, this is one of the mugs I've got to get out of the way. It's kind of not doing what I want. But, oh, there it goes. You'll see me mess up. It's all right. I mess up quite a bit. But I throw really thin. So.
I feel like if you are surreal, starts messing up is part of the process.
Oh, absolutely.
Make it look intentional.
Somebody said, and I like, in order to be a good potter, you got to mess up a lot of pots.
I
So.
tell my students that they don't want to do it, kill 100. Kill 100 pots, they can talk.
Yeah, I tell my students something like that too. Whenever they start to get discouraged, it's what was it? Edison failed over 2,000 times to make the light bulb.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I always think that's a very powerful statement. And then I follow it by, which talks a little bit about our culture, is that first light bulb still works too. So I hate this mug, so I'm just starting. I'm a big believer in editing. If it's not working out, start over. You can always rewrite it. I call that future pots. There.
Not to get attached to somebody.
Yeah, absolutely. Do not get
I
attached.
am working on that. I am working on that.
I tell my kids that. I tell them, don't even get attached to you get it home. Because
I did. The most recent pot that we took home was our negative space in his class, and I messed up. I had to restore that 4 times, and I was not attached until after it was fired. I'm like, no, not attached. Replace. I don't care. I can restart.
Yeah, it's all clay, and this stuff is it's about 50 cents a pound. If you buy it in bulk, it's a lot cheaper than that. I mean, it is expensive to fire things, so I would rather not fire bad pots.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just something I just do not want to do. If I'm not happy with it, then just throw it away and start over. So. Back to a mug here. But yes, I use my ribs a lot. I use wooden ribs. I actually use 2 different types of wooden ribs. I use a wooden rib that's been used a whole lot, so it's not sharp at all. And then I use a wooden rib that is sharp, that has sharp ends on it. And then I use metal ribs. I use your normal rib that comes with your, my boss calls it the metal rib of death because it, can gouge you and your hands get, oh, here I throw stuff.
I learned that. I learned it, and I cut myself home one.
And then
I
like,
did a lot in his class.
I used to pride myself just on using the beginner's toolkit, besides a couple of like trimming tools, but I have started to branch out into the mud tools, ribs. They're just incredible. Some of their tools are really nice. But I don't use rubber for throwing. Some people do. I use rubber ribs more for slab building and textures, and, coil building, that sort of stuff. And it's to each their own, you know, the way I look at it. So.
I would agree with that. I use the rubber one more for smoothing out hand building.
Yeah,
I love the kidney shaped one. That's mine.
That's the only rubber one I have. Is
Well,
the
the
kidney
metal
shaped.
one that turns around.
Oh, yeah. I do use it to smooth the bottom of my pot, to sort of burnish the bottom of my pot after I trim it. I use my rubber ribs a lot for that.
So when did you start getting, having the drawing? I know your undergrad was more hand building, wasn't it?
It's interesting, you know, my transition in clay. I think everybody's path is interesting, and we all get somewhere with it. But I started at Missouri State over here. And somebody, I think earlier, was mentioning getting their kid in, you know, making some work with their kid or their grandchild. Is that? Yeah. Okay, so my mother took a sculpture class when I was 5 years old, and she used to bring me up there. She was a single mom, and the class would sort of take care of me, and they'd sit me off to the side and give me all this clay to work with. Then after the class was over, she brought that clay home with me and gave me this board, and so I started making all these, you know, army things and tanks and airplanes, and replaying these scenarios out in my head. But it was all out of clay. And then I forgot it. I just largely just, you know, forgot and moved on with other things. But I started taking some art classes in school after I broke up with this girl, after this girl broke up with me. And I was very upset sort of with where my life was going. It's like, you know, what am I doing? You know, I used to make a lot of art and I loved it. Am I trying to be a computer programmer? I'm obviously not one. And so I started taking art classes over here, and, you know, took drawing and painting and all that stuff. And I had this sort of inkling that I was going to like ceramics, but you know, I didn't know. And then I got in with Keith. Keith was my teacher, Keith Exam. And I got in with him. And after that first class, you know, those memories of playing with that board and all that clay, that sculpture just came flooding in. Sort of the feel and the smell of clay. Definitely the feel. You know, I think that's a very seductive part of what we do. And so I knew right there that that's what I wanted to do. At the end of that class, I went to Keith and was like, hey, can you help me? You know, I want to do this. He kind of looked at me kind of funny, like, you know what you're getting into. But he did help me. And so my teachers were sculptors. You know, both of them were sculptors, you know. And so I thought that's sort of what I had to be too, was a sculptor. You know, they're also wood firers. So at that same time, I was like, well, maybe that's what I've got to do too. I got a wood fire, or I got a salt fire. I got to do all these different things. And so really, I've tried a whole bunch of things. And I try a lot of things, and I sort of say, well, yeah, that's a process I really enjoy, or no, that's not a process that I enjoy. My sculpture, you know, David's seen some of my work. He's been there when I've set it up. And he's seen me basically about kill myself trying to do it a couple times. But it's very powerful stuff. It's very involving stuff for me. And so it takes a ton of energy and it takes a ton of time. I'm not satisfied working at something on this level. It has to be something like room level, like installation wise. And so to be able to do that now is difficult with, I have a new baby, I have a job, I have a family, and I have a massive student loan debt, and all those things. So how do you continue to make it work? Well, for me, you know, my wife went to grad school, the University of Iowa, right after I graduated. And so my number one thought was instead of making artwork was how are we going to survive? I'm going to take care of her. And so I didn't touch clay for 3 years. I ran a restaurant, I cooked, and I was a chef, I was a bartender, I was all those things. And I hated it the whole time. It made me depressed. But then I was lucky enough to get back into clay by finding this job that allowed me to do what I loved, which is, playing with clay, and get paid for it. So without having to live on my artwork. Now I do, my pots do pay for a portion of my income. I think it's around maybe 1/6 of my income somewhere. I was trying to think of it the other day. And of course, I'd like that to be more, so that I'm sort of working on ways to facilitate that. But as far as the sculpture goes, I have not gotten back into it. I have ideas. I keep a sculpture notebook that I sort of draw in, and I talk about my ideas, and I keep thinking about those things. But because I teach pots. That's predominantly what I teach is pottery. And much of my day is spent working on pots. That's sort of where my interest has gotten back to. Now, I've always made pots, I've never been, as I said, I try lots of things. I try lots of firing, different types of firings. I try lots of different processes. I'm very good with extruders and hand building and all these things. But I've always been fascinated also with something spinning in front of me on the wheel. And maybe it's that simple, that you've got spirals and concentric circles moving around. And you've got this really fluid, wonderful clay. So I'll never stop throwing. And if what I can do is make my living from making pots, then I'll be very happy doing so. If it's making sculpture or some way I can get back to that place where I was at that point in time in my life, I'll be very happy to get there. And maybe this can get me back there.
Is your avenue for sales through your shop, or do you sell it in any other venue?
I sell mostly through my shop, but I'm currently working on a website that I can sell through, okay? And then I do a lot of social media work. And so I'm working on trying to build that up. And, that takes a lot of time. But that's just getting your name out there, I think. So you see, I poke a lot of things. I tend to move things around a whole lot. I'm not really satisfied with pots that aren't bumping around or moving in some way or another. And then I use a real fluid glaze on top of that. And the bumps that I put in my pots sort of dictate where my glazes run to. And so I'm sort of throwing my pots lately for my glazes. And so this will get a handle from there to there, and I may move it around, bump it around. So.
When did you graduate?
From MSU, it was SMS back then. I graduated in 2006. Went to grad school in 2008. I worked for Nathan Falter for 2 years at Springfield Pottery, which was a wonderful, wonderful thing. Nathan's an amazing person, so he's also an artist that survives on his work, which is it's amazing. So.
Nathan and I had ceramics one together.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, but that's a long time ago.
I love that dude. He's so great. Keith and Kevin taught me so much about art and about making and about sculpture and all this stuff, camaraderie and clay. But Nathan taught me how to get a 401k and how to impact my work and how to do things that a living artist, a working artist needs to do. So, all right, so this is a little bit more clay here. This will be, this is a 4-pound piece of clay. Let's see, do I want to make a bowl or a platter? Make a platter. plate. So I cone a lot. You guys cone? Move things up and down the wheel. It's good. It's a part of centering. If you cone, you don't have to wedge as much. Wedging's hard on the wrists. I have wrist problems and thumb problems. And so I try not to use hard clay. I try to use nice soft clay that moves really easily in my hands. And I do more of the work on the wheel. So platters and plates are more about pressing than making pulls. It's about pressing that clay down and keeping it centered and doing a small pull at the end. If there's any questions about how to do things, just let me know. So I'm really compressing here, pressing down fairly hard. I'm not straining with my voice, but I was straining with my arm there. Moving that clay outwards. I always tend to throw my platters a little thin sometimes, so I'm always testing, doing a depth check there. You guys do that? Stab your pots. It's good. I can get my plates a little too thin sometimes. I think plates and platters and some of this work should be a little thicker. So,
Do you leave enough room to put a foot on it, or do you?
I do. I put a foot on everything. And then I have to manipulate that foot and put bumps in it. Most of my platters actually have what I call a wall hanging foot ring. Okay. And I use a tool that cuts underneath the foot that I can put a ledge and then hang it on a nail. So I don't have to use wires or anything like that. I like to look at my platters as sort of like canvases for the glaze. You know, people want to use them, it's great, they can use them, but when they're done with them, they can put them up on the wall. So, all right, so a little pull at the end. Got the nice and I don't want it. If we can get these dry enough for tomorrow, then I'll trim them. I'll show you. I'll put that foot ring in and show you the tool that I use for it too. It's a great tool.
Do you slow dry things or do you fast?
Yeah, I tend to be the type of person that takes his time with just about everything. You know, I'm not really ever in a hurry, or I don't like to be in a hurry to do anything. It's a lot of stress, you know? And some people really stress over how they dry things. I don't hurry them, but I'm in the studio all the time. So my job, you know, I spend 10 hours in the studio every day. And so if I throw a pot in the morning and leave it out, then sometimes I can finish it that day, sometimes I can't. So if I can't, then I'll, you know, put it on the table and cover it up, depending on what I got going on. And so no, I don't really slow dry things. Some people really take that really seriously. They make these real thick things or whatever it is. And I think that if you throw it correctly most of the time, then and you turn it over at the right time, get it off the bat, then you don't really need to. I do slow dry anything that I make connections with, but the slow dry is like a day. So if I put handles on, I'll loosely cover them with plastic and leave them for a day so it catches up to the cup, and then pull the plastic off and fire them the next day. All right, so it looks kind of like a big bowl. Give it a second. Thin some of that out. I'm trying to keep it sort of a similar consistency to how thick this is, or how thick it's going to be after I trim it. So then I don't have to worry so much about the drying. If you have parts in your clay that go from real thick to thin and then back to thick again, then that's when you need to slow dry things. Okay, because what happens is those thin places, they dry out faster, and that causes expansion contraction problems from the clay drying. I worked with this kid once. I worked with a ton of kids. ton of kids. And this kid he's a strong kid, he's a big kid for his age, and he was very rambunctious. And his idea of making this flower pot for his mom was he wanted it to be really sturdy. So he thought that if he kept making it thicker and thicker, that it would be better. And so the bottom of this pot was very thin, but the walls were super thick. And so when it was drying, I saw this pot, it opened up, like it started as a crack, then it opened up into an eye, okay? And then by the time the walls dried, it closed back up again, which I thought was absolutely amazing. And we glazed it up and it was fine. But that's coming from thick and thin and the differences in drying. So you have to be careful, I guess. You know, if you're making sculptures that have that, then you need to slow dry things. So for my rims here, if you might be able to see it again or not, I try to do what's known as a split rim, and I press on my rim and split that. And what that does is it gives me a little layer, little line for my glaze to sit in. And I'll put that back together a little bit. So I'll have a line around my rim. It makes it a little harder to trim, but like that. And back to using my ribs. I'm always using my ribs. If you're not using your ribs, your forms are going to come out very organic and lumpy. And there we go. I'm pressing this down, lowering that into a platter. There we go.
Now, when you're firing these, do you ever have any warping issues, or do you embrace those? Or?
I don't have very many warping issues, to be honest. And maybe that comes with the way I make them. Or maybe it comes because you're going to get ready to see it here. I've bend this quite a bit. And maybe it's because I bend it that you can't see it, you know? Maybe my warping issues are just hidden, which I'm okay with. So I'm doing concentric circles on this one, kind of like a bullseye. And put some lines in here. Excuse me. That's all right. I'll turn it off after I wash my hands. So I put all these lines in here because when I bend it, it bends and moves these lines a whole lot. And I love that. So I'm going to come in and really bend that up. I tend to poke my pots 3 or 4 times. And I use that sort of like a base 3 or a base 4 as a method to divide up my pots and to allow me to decorate it, okay? So I did 1, 2, and then 3, and 1, 2, 3. And then on the bottom, I kind of call them waltzing pots. On the bottom, my foot will have 3 marks on it, and then 3 marks over here, and 3 marks over here, and a couple more marks. So it's all based on that number 3 or 4. And it's a way that I can divide everything up. There we go. It loosens up a little bit if you spin it. And there's a platter. These are always kind of hard to get up. There we go. So, see that slight little bend? I'm really interested in that slight little bend, okay? And not having everything just be perfectly flat. Let's see. Turn that off. That's probably it. loan company.
Aren't you at work? You should be earning over.
All right. Let's do a large bowl. So I'm also in a position where I sort of have to throw live pots, which is kind of cool. I teach, so I have to show people how to throw pots. But I also have, a huge fundraiser every year, which is empty bowls, sort of.
I saw that
Doing my
online.
thing.
We've done a small version,
Uh,
but it ended up, I was the only one making pots. Like, well, my kids don't get that much time on the bill and they get part of theirs. But I didn't have to make them give it up, so I'd make them and they'd trim them and glaze them and then give them away. We had a stupid deal. But yours is.
Ours is big, ours is huge, and it's, it wasn't something that, I started. I sort of came in to this job after the ex-studio manager and the boss had some arguments, so, I sort of took his place. And Empty Bowls was already sort of established, as our fundraiser in that area. I happen to work for the wife of a doctor. Okay, and the doctor is a very big doctor at Freeman Hospital. I'm not saying he makes tons of money, but they subsidize the clay facility. Okay, so they're the sort of the angels that they do it because they want to help people. And so part of their mission, and I agree with it, is to be a part of the community and sort of prove why you're valuable. And the Empty Bowls helps us do that. So in the last 3 weeks, I've thrown probably 350 pots, thrown a lot of bowls, and I facilitated, the making of almost 700 or 800. So I make a lot of pots, and even if I'm not throwing them, I'm trimming somebody else's, or I'm glazing them, or something along those lines. But that goes back to the testing. I do lots and lots of testing, and Empty Bowls to me equals over 1,000 test tiles. And right now I'm really interested in microcrystalline glazes within a cone 10 reduction atmosphere. And also the use of iron in clays and glazes. Iron's a very, very versatile color. You can go purple, you can go yellow, brown, black. So, well, that's part of it.
I just do school-based, public school.
We.
Yeah, so no.
I remember when I was trying to choose, what I wanted to do with my life and what I wanted to focus on. I was pretty good at drawing and painting. Yeah, I could draw and paint. But then I got to the point where I was doing this stuff in ceramics where I was playing with fire, which is a part of it. I love to play with fire. That's a great thing. It's also, there's so much more to it than just going to the store and buying paint. And granted, you can make your own paint, you can make your own pigments, your dyes and all those things. But I think the more that you can involve yourself with that sort of study, the more you can bring to the table. And there's a lot of science that goes on with this, tons of science. And so, for instance, they're working on this stuff at Berkeley. It's called single-phase epsilon iron. Okay, single-phase epsilon iron. And single-phase epsilon iron, the purest form that they found it, is in old Chinese hare's fur and oil spot pottery. Okay, so it's something that they use for computers. Okay, it's very unstable, and they're working on a way to synthesize it. So Berkeley is now firing oil spot kilns to try to figure out how to collect this iron. All right, and it's something that the Chinese did very well in the 15th century. Okay, so whoever figures that out, it's like $1 billion industry. Okay, and potters can help figure that out. Okay, I also like to sort of dream about Otto. You guys know Otto Haney? You ever heard of him? Okay, so he has like several sort of claims to fame, which I think are really interesting. One of which he was one of the original ceramic engineers that designed the space shuttle tip. Okay, and so uses of clay and ceramics, they use it all over. We use it in kaopectate, to stop us up. But they use it, and NASA uses it as a heat shield. But this guy, he was a ceramic engineer in the 50s. He started throwing pots in the 60s. And, there was this elusive yellow glaze. Okay, this elusive yellow glaze that the Chinese used also in like the 14th and the 15th century. And, everybody's looking for it or working on it, or some of these people. It's hard to get yellow in a high fire atmosphere. It's very hard to get a nice yellow. And so this yellow was sought after. It was in all the museums, $1 million pots, and nobody knew how to do it. They'd forgotten. Just like they'd forgotten how to do copper reds. You guys know what copper reds are? Okay, copper reds are something similar. It's hard to get a red like this red here. Cone 10, okay? And the Chinese knew how to do it years and years ago, and they'd forgotten. And so in the 90s, there was this movement to sort of figure that out. Now it's figured out, 80s and 90s, and everybody uses it, okay? So Otto, he did this with his yellow glaze, him and his wife. His wife died before he found it, but he tested it for 20 years, okay? So every kiln that he fired, he threw in a little yellow test tile, all right? Then he got it. And he said the day that he got it, he opened up a champagne bottle, and then he called China. Okay, so he called China and sent them pictures. I don't know who he called, but sent pictures of this yellow glaze, and then immediately, Japanese and Chinese were on his doorstep going, "What is it? What do you got there? What are you doing?" And it was like, "We need to buy that from you. We'll give you $1 million for your glaze recipe." And he told them no. So he worked for 20 years for this glaze recipe, His wife died before she figured it out, And he was like, "No, it's mine. I'll tell you what I will do, though, is I'll sell you a bucket of my glaze for $100,000. You can buy one a year. And I will sell you, I think it's 50 or 100 of my pots for $500,000 a year for the rest of my life." And that's what he did. He was the only potter to ever drive a Bentley. But I guess sort of the moral of the story is that he did that through his love of searching and through testing and those things. And when he died, before he died, everybody was asking him, are you going to give up the secret to your glaze? He's like, you know what? No, I'm taking it with me. Okay. So what he did was he sort of secured his place in history, where the Chinese did it in the 15th century. He did it in the 20th century. And he was saying that if you're good enough to figure it out, then you can do this too. That being said, he gave us tons of recipes. So he's never a selfish person. It was just, that was his,
I was going to just put that much criteria down. What's the point in telling other people when they're going to try to make a profit off it and say,
well, yeah. Well, I read an article about him too, and he also said, this is a beautiful, beautiful glaze. It's one of the most beautiful glazes I've ever seen. And he said, I don't want to see it on bad pots. Mm-hmm.
what was this last name?
Otto Haney. It's if you look up $1 Million Yellow, then you'll find all sorts of information on Otto. He's a very fascinating person. He lived into his 90s and made pots almost until he died. Are you guys familiar with Beatrice Wood? Okay, so he actually bought Beatrice Wood's studio when she was giving up pots, so out in California. So this is a large bowl. I tend to throw my bowls and my forms tall and then bend them into forms. And I do that to sort of get the most out of my clay. It's a little bumpy on top. I'll probably cut that top part off. But I'm really working down at the bottom, trying to get as much of that up there as I can. And I throw what I call a protoform. I don't know if that's the right term for it, but that's what I call it. And it's basically the form before it becomes the bowl. Okay. If you're throwing towards the shape that you want, in the end, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay. So for a form that I want to be out like this, I throw it like this first and then bend it into that form at the end. And I call that setting the curve or setting the arch. And there's a reason why they call it architecture. It's because the arch is very strong. And that's something I learned from Chris Gusta, watching him up at that Lawrence Art Center symposium. He talked about the arch. And so this is fairly thin, getting pretty thin up there, 4 pounds, 4-pound bowl. Stretching it, moving it. I'm gonna cut the top off because I'm not happy with that little bump that's bumping around there. Every now and again I get those. So, always coming back and compressing the rib, compressing with my ribs.
The ribs are also removing that layer of split.
Yep. So when I start throwing, I use a lot of water, and in the end, I don't use very much water at all. And so whatever I put on the pot, in essence, I'm taking off in the end. And so my pots dry relatively fast, but you are pulling off that moisture. All right, so I'm to the point where I'm going to start stretching this out. And I'm going to use my ribs for that.
And that's a lot of like smaller bowls. Over here, that's more like an Asian theme with steak cups.
Those are those things that we sort of pick up as we make pots. And my professors in undergrad always had Asian potters around. They just did. And I learned a lot from these guys, from visiting artists. They had a sort of a cultural exchange. I didn't get to go, but they said, okay, you would be perfect. You'd be the perfect person to go, but it's not your time. We got to send somebody from Drury. So, but they'd always send somebody over here, and we'd send somebody over there, and they'd send their teachers, and everybody would go back and forth. And so I learned how to make teapots and tea bowls from a Taiwanese guy. And for my professors, they made a lot of these tea bowls and teapots. So I was like, hey, why not? I should make tea bowls and teapots too, right? And now people do say my work has that Asian quality to it. And I say, thank you, And it's not something I don't think I've ever strived to make, but I do really appreciate it. Okay, and so maybe that influence is there for that reason. When I look at pots, I Google a lot of old pots. New pots are interesting, but old pots to me are just very, very interesting. And
I feel like if you look up the old pots and compare them to the new pots, you get a really interesting evolution of how we adapted.
Sure. Let's see, what other ways can I address that? I love making teapots. I love making tea bowls. Nobody over here buys tea bowls or teapots. Okay. I do make some coffee makers, and some people will buy coffee makers, but I don't sell. Mostly I give away a lot of my tea bowls to people just because it's kind of like a business card almost. It's like, here you go. It's good to meet you, whatever it is.
It's a very interesting business card.
Yeah, but I don't get to sell a whole lot here in Joplin, Missouri. So the or Springfield, Missouri. The market for tea bowls is not so much there, but the market for whiskey cups or shots or double shots. Okay, now if you look at the two forms, pretty much exactly the same. All right. Now the tea bowls, beyond that, I mean, there's a lot of sculptural tea bowls out there. There's a lot of amazing tea bowls that we really, and some people even say this, some Asian cultures say this, that the Americans really have no business making tea bowls, okay? Because it's not part of our culture. It's part of their culture. It's part of the Buddhist tea ceremony. It's part of all these things. And so, but at the same time, I think of it as like, well, you guys made it all to begin with. And so there's not really anything left for us to make. So we have to take it from somewhere, you know? So if I have to call it a whiskey cup to sell it, then I will, but preferably it's a tea bowl, you know? If you look at those classical forms, you know, I've got this sheet, you know, I don't know where it came from. It might have come from Pottery Making Illustrated. It might have come from whatever, but it's got all these old forms that were made into tea bowls or bowls by, you know, the Japanese and the Chinese. And, you know, every single thing that I'm doing, you know, they've made it before and they've got a drawing of it and they've got a name for it. So, you know, I think the more you know about that as well can help inform what you make. And so those sort of wide low bowls that I make, those are Summer tea bowls. Okay, so they're very thin, they're very wide open, so they don't hold the heat. You pour, it cools, and then you can drink quickly. Okay, so the ones that, you know, are more upright, and they're called a waist style tea bowl because they come in and they bend in like this. Those are more for keeping it warm, and they should be a little thicker, even though I throw mine really thin. So, but that sort of stuff can inform your work. So I do look at a lot of it. All right, so I'm just working back and forth. I tend to have a real narrow base on my bowls. I like the idea of balance, you know, and this sort of precarious. It's kind of precarious, I guess, you know. But I like a real thin foot and a real wide lip. So I work with my rib pressing out. And then I'll work back in on the inside a little bit.
Beth Kavner, she had a workshop at KU, and she was talking about
The
strength of the pot comes from the compression of the surface of the outside. So she says like, it was like a 32nd or 16th of an inch on the outside and the inside. That's where the strength is, because that's where you're compressing. And the stuff in between there is just kind of waste. So if you have a really thick pot, it's still just that outside edge is giving you that strength. And then the middle isn't really doing much. So that's her philosophy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it goes back for me is trying to make the most out of my clay. You know, I found that when I got back to making pots that I was going to make these, I was like, oh, I'm going to make these really large pots. I'm going to throw 20 pounds of clay and, you know, see how much I can. Well, I'd look at a 10-pound pot and then a 20-pound pot, and there wasn't much difference for me, you know, because I'd reached that point where it's like, and, you know, maybe I'm not that person, you know, that needs to throw a 25-pound pot, or maybe I can do a whole lot with a 10-pound pot, or I can put two 10-pound pots together. But I try to do as much as I can with what I have, all right? And so I get it thin, and I get it into, you know, sort of the protoform that I talked about, and then I stretch it. And it's that stretching, it's that compression from the ribs that helps keep it that way. And so I don't know so much about whether it's just that surface on the outside that's keeping it that way, but for me, it's just trying to do the most with what I can, with what I have.
And she tries to compress it as much as she can. She gets her sculptures ridiculously thin for what they are.
Really, they look so thick to me. You know, I've seen them in real life, but I've never, you know, picked them up and handled them in those things. And I was really jealous that KU had that workshop. I wasn't able to go. My boss went, and I could not go. I haven't read the new Garth Clark article about her yet. Have you read that? Yeah, it's been circulating for a little bit. apparently she was interviewed by Garth Clark recently, and I'm very interested in reading that. She also has a new husband and a kid that's really informing her work. Her work went really dark for a little bit from her divorce, so kind of interesting to see how she's changed. And her new husband, have you seen like the tattoo work that he does, like on the surface of those sculptures? That's his. She makes the form, and he comes in and draws all this. It's very big. Yeah. All right, so this has gotten pretty thin. Probably start bumping it around a little bit. And I used to, until recently, this is something that Empty Bowls does for me. It's not only that I get to test 1,000 pots with glazes, I get to make several hundred and just sort of play with them. You get bored making the same pot over and over and over again. And so let's, bend things and move them and press into them and do strange things and wear them on our heads or whatever, But I used to poke, and what I call them is pokes. And it's sort of my signature move where if you looked at a lot of my work, you'd see this little indentation that I make, okay? And what that does is it changes the inside of the pot a little bit, changes the outside of the pot, and it also now makes that nice and wavy, which I'm interested in. But lately I've started to sort of get away from my poke a little bit and started doing a lot more presses. I press with my fingers, and then I'll come back in and manipulate the surface after the fact. But there we go, that's starting to get interesting now. I'm fairly happy with that. Maybe I'll spin it real quick. There we go. So if you poke things and move them around a little bit, you still got it attached to the wheel. You can sort of just spin your wheel. Now it's sort of a risk. Sometimes it'll lay your pot down flat, but it's kind of moving a little bit and shaking it. You spin it real fast, and then it sort of goes and sets to that final position. And maybe it warps from that in the kiln. I don't know if it does or not, but I can't tell at the end of it. Jeez, I keep telling. Thank you, buddy. All right, so big bowl. A smaller one of those. So what does everybody do here? You guys teach, okay, and you make work. You make pots and stuff. You
I
like to
do
throw?
some, I grow with my kids. I teach at the alternative high school, so I have small class. Right now, I have 6 in my ceramics class, 3 wheels. Are part of their problem is attendance. I haven't seen one in like 8 days.
Yeah. That's hard.
Yeah, so a lot of times there's an open wheel.
You can't make them be interested, so,
No.
yeah, but you can
So,
introduce them.
they're there because they're limited for school. And some of them are there seeing it as an opportunity to graduate. But that's the only advanced courses that they offer. They have to take on examinations. And we do about 8 weeks of ceramics in one semester. So, a little more going, but I don't do as much as I'd like to. But I used to have a service learning grant and our empty bowls because I also teach facts on that. And the grant funding was dried up.
As it always does. Jeez.
Yeah.
We're working on some of that stuff now
We were
too.
pretty small, so I get to play some. I play for a few seconds along the way and watch David teach his class. Sit on.
So with your empty bowls while you're throwing, how fast you got your bowl making down to?
If I have all of my clay and everything ready and set out, last year I was throwing really fast. I was throwing I got down to 90 seconds per bowl from putting it on to taking it off. But I looked at some of the bowls and they were fun and interesting, but it was mostly for speed. So I didn't have to do as much work afterwards, I just have a flat bottom or whatever. But I found that for me, I'd rather experiment with the form a little bit more, so I slow down. And so now I take about 3 minutes a bowl. And then I spend a lot of time bumping them around and playing with them. And that to me is much more enjoyable, fast or slow, but it also keeps you gestural, not spending too much time, but spending enough time to touch it and mark it and move it. Now all these little bumps I'm going to come back in and press things into. Okay, so I'm sort of shaping it now so I can shape it later, if that makes sense. So, some of these have to dry a little bit. Again, I have to touch every little part. 90 seconds, I can throw really fast if I want to, and if I set myself up and I go, okay, get a couple through and then get my process down. Throwing is very much a process, Step by step, you can walk yourself through that process. And the more you've had that conversation or that process, the faster that you get at it, it becomes this sort of intuitive process. And I like to think of the forms as these sort of internal things, okay? These things that we've done enough times that they're internalized and we're regurgitating, okay, over and over again. And every time you regurgitate something or throw that form again, you do it in a different manner, you're exploring that form. So for me, maybe I do have a sculptor's mind and I make pots. So I view all my pots as like mini little sculptures, all right? So they're very well thought out. They're very well divided up using the geometry of the pot. And they're forms that are in me, I can look at you and talk to you and not look at it so much because I've had this conversation with my hands in the clay a lot. And the only way you can teach that is by having somebody sit down and throw a lot of pots. If you want to be a potter, you got to throw pots. You got to throw a lot of them. And throwing, a few a day is not going to get you there.
When is this year's event?
It's on the 19th. We've already started pre-selling our bowls. We pre-sell for $25 a bowl, and the bowls are beautiful this year. I mean, I've had all the input on glazing them. I didn't have to glaze them all. I didn't have to make them all, but I got to facilitate the making. So, people will come in. I have volunteers, people from the studio that like to just come and hang out. We sort of give them, after they've got enough experience, sort of carte blanche to do what they want with some of the empty bowls. And we don't charge them for it. Okay? So it's a way for us to say, come and practice, throw bowls, throw 10 today, or come in and practice glazing, And so, but when they glaze, I'll say, why don't you put 3D white on bottom and then, rim dip all these others, with these other glazes. And so I've had a lot of control over the way that the bowls are gonna look, and they look fantastic this year. So November 19th at Phoenix Fired Art, we've got 18 or 20 different restaurants that are donating food, and the entire operation is funded. I mean, I'm sure my boss pays for some of the, of course, the equipment usage and maintenance and the fees for the energy costs. And so that's part of what she wants to do. She's not necessarily out there to make so much money as so much that I really want this to be a community play center and to be a valuable part of this community and to be something that she wants to be involved in. She doesn't have to work but she does this because she wants to. So Empty Bowls is growing, and she really works at it. You know, she goes and talks to all these people. She's, you know, a big part of the community. There's a lot of fundraisers that she goes to, and you know.
So you begin on the 19th, does it go through the weekend, or is it just?
It's just on the 19th.
Just on the 19th?
Yeah, it's the third Thursday. Joplin has this weird thing with Thursdays. For some reason, they want everything to be on Thursday. It drives me crazy. It's like, you guys don't want First Fridays? They're like, oh, we don't want to compete with Springfield. It's like, nobody from Springfield's going to come all the way down there for It's like, just have them on Fridays when everybody can go out and have a good time and go to bed and not have to get up and go to work in the morning, that sort of thing. But instead, we do everything on Thursday. So we do a morning and an evening. We do a dinner and a lunch, and we'll put out half the bowls, and then we'll put out, oh, I love this part. This part's great. It's when you stretch a pot. That's a great way to make it thin. You see how that's just moving outwards? They say that, but you know, looking back on it, I've been throwing for 13 years. Okay, so, but thank you. You know, it's nice to be able to finally be at that point to make it. Yeah. I sometimes wonder, like, I don't necessarily throw my bowls or my cups when I'm showing people how to throw, because I do make it look too easy. So I kind of, you know, make some rudimentary pots so I don't make them feel bad after they've thrown a couple, because they'll see it and be like, oh, I can do that. And then I'd be like, how do I do this again?
I saw it on public TV. I know I can do it.
All right, so that line, put some lines on the outside, and now I'll come back in and bend this up a little bit. Maybe we'll do threes on this one. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. So I take a really sort of stiff type form, and then I turn it into this sort of organic flowing form, which I love.
You put a little indentation in the rim of your platter and said that that's where you catch your glaze.
Uh-huh.
Do you have one over here that has that?
Yeah, probably that big black platter has a little bit of it. I mean, that's always the goal, whether it happens or not is kind of up to the kiln. I kind of view what I do as, especially in reduction or, you know, an atmospheric kiln, is that you set things up to happen. Okay, so you set up the possibilities that things can occur. You know, it's a little bit more, you know, with low fire work, you know, you, what you see is kind of what you get, you know, and
And you're putting so many layers of glaze.
Yeah. Yeah, that bowl that you're touching, the bowl that you're touching right there has 2 dips of Timuku, which is one of the oldest glazes on the planet. And then it's got a Rutile blue on top of it. And the Rutile blue is very runny. And it's got 3 to 4 dips of that Rutile blue on it, okay? So I throw thin and I put a ton of glaze on it. Sometimes the glaze is thicker than my pots.
And I see your little cookery.
Yeah. So, yeah, so that's a wall hanging platter right there. So you can hang it up, and it looks great like that. You know, you put like 4 or 5 of them up there. That's awesome on the wall. In fact, in our studio we have, you know, just this whole sort of high partition that has my plates and platters all the way across it. So, okay, this will be a vase. I haven't thrown any vases yet, so let's start with vases.
Well, I'm going to give you the I'll push that way to the cracks.
Well, you mess up a lot of pots, you know, so I think how long is kind of hard to answer, but I went back and looked at my pots in grad school, and there's a lot of things that I like about them, but they're pretty clunky, I think, in some terms. They're a little bit thick, and whenever I started throwing again, I decided I really wanted to refine my processes, and so I just decided that, well, A, I don't pay for my clay. It's something that's always there for me. So if I mess it up, then I don't have to worry about it. I just recycle it, then do it again. So just as I'm trying to experiment all the time with my glazes, I'm also trying to experiment with my pots and try to get them thinner and thinner, or a little bit more fluid. So it took me quite a few years, I guess, to sort of start to get all of the clay, everything out of the clay that I need. So maybe 10 years. Yeah. But saying that, it's like I was also a sculptor for a long time. I did other things. My focus was never entirely pots until now. So if I'd spent that whole time working on pots, I probably would have gotten there faster.
Now, one of the things you guys, one of the artists said, it takes 10,000 hours to master something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
To master the skill.
probably. You know Jerry Hatch?
Yeah.
Remember that? Okay. Somebody asked him one time, and I always loved this, that he was drawing in an open workshop or an open drawing. We were drawing naked people. And, Jerry would sit there, and if you've ever seen Jerry's work, it's very precise and process-oriented and beautiful. And his drawings are just, he'll look forever, ever, and just this little mark, and it's about like the perfect little mark. And somebody asked him one time, it's like, how long would it take to learn to draw like that, to be proficient at that? And he was like, I can teach you in about 15 years. And that's, it's funny, but it's kind of an honest statement. I think you can make good work, as a young artist. You can make really good work. You can make really informed work and all these things, but become really proficient at something, just like if you want to be a potter, you got to make pots. If you want to be a painter, you got to paint a lot of paintings. And so I think the 10,000 hour thing is probably a good thing. I was reading about Robin Hopper. You guys know Robin Hopper? Robin Hopper is getting ready to die, okay? And it's horrible because he's an amazing person and he's an amazing potter, and the wealth of knowledge that he has given to the world is huge. But he had these sort of like final notes, when he was closing up his Facebook site, saying, giving sort of final words of wisdom. And he said, in order to be a good potter, it's going to take you 15 years to make good pots. And I'm not quite there yet. So, although I think I'm proficient.
I started out doing this year. Then I took 15 years off.
There's a lot to be said for that too. Those things that inform you. I'm very guilty, and it was something that was always a critique in grad school of me. I spend all my time in the studio. I don't get out and do other things. I just make all the time. So, taking time off to do other things is a good thing. Having a family, it's an amazing thing for me right now. It's going to be really interesting to see how having a baby affects what I make, especially in my sculptural work.
How old is your baby?
She's 1 month old.
Oh.
Yeah. So.
How did it change?
Well, it hasn't changed so much yet, but I'm definitely a big believer that you sort of move through your work as you move through your life, and we'll see how it changes me. Whether I start drawing, baby things or making toys. My professors, they went through this, every time they had a baby, they went through a toy phase. Where they put toys, pulley carts or whatever it was that they were doing.
Keith's love for plastic toys when they were all grown up.
Well, I don't know. Maybe it's longing back for that again. I think Keith just finds something that he likes and he throws something in his sculpture. We've got some of his work up on our walls up at Phoenix, and I'm looking in there, I was like, that's a Kong. And he's taking, it's a dog toy that he's got. He's got lots of dog toys in his work.
His kids are running around the studio.
Oh, yeah. You know, I don't know his kids that much. I've met them a couple of times, but they were a little grown up whenever I first started over there.
Wow.
But I do know Kevin's kids.
Yeah, I graduated in 2001.
Oh yeah,
It was before.
you look so familiar. Like I've seen you before. I probably have.
I'm a full-time father.
Full-time potter. Awesome. So what do you make?
I make pots.
Make pots?
I'm my big gig right now is that I'm
Now I'm nervous. You got a full-time potter watching.
I'm the potter for Top of the Rock in Dixie Lodge. I'm the solo potter.
Okay,
Their stores.
fantastic.
But I spend most of my time on the road, and I mean a lot of my time on the road. St. Louis is my biggest market,
Okay.
so I do a lot of shows there. But I'm closing it down. I'm moving back to Canada,
Oh,
Vancouver Island.
oh. So-
Next year will be my last year.
So shows this year. How are you doing this year?
It is so inconsistent.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had shows that I didn't expect to do anything at and done really well, and shows that I always do well at and done very good. So I mean, I eke out a living.
You eke out a living?
Yeah, well, I'm doing okay. I'm doing
Yeah.
okay, but.
Sure.
Yeah,
You know, it's something I've done craft shows. You know, I worked for my cousin for a while and did, sold embroidery and did all this stuff. It's a ton of work, doing all that stuff.
it's just the massive, the weight of it now. Every weekend I do a show, I load and unload a ton in and out of my van and set it up. I mean, by the time I load it in and unload it for the show, load it back in, unload it when I get home. And then I start throwing pots on Monday, so it's like.
Yeah. Like when you have time to rest and sort of recoup. And then it costs a lot of money to do those.
Yeah.
The entry fees for those shows, that's a lot of.
Sprinkler shows?
Yeah, I can do it. Art Fest and Secret of the Park, which is the best show.
Oh.
Park, Secret, that's the best show.
You look familiar to me, like Warfest.
But I'm really doing it.
I got this a little too thin up on
Okay,
top.
maybe you Kevin.
I write it.
If I can get that back in,
Yeah, that's where I'm talking. You made me go over pictures.
I think I got that a little too far out there.
Are you part of that art and craft guild as well?
Yes. The Southwest Park. I think.
No, actually, I'm one of the founders. 25 years ago.
Were you at the show last weekend?
Or what, the weekend today?
Secret of the Park, and the one that the comment was wrote, that you were pleased at what's happened to that show in 25 years. Yeah.
I'm very pleased. Kathy Evans took over when my husband, it was started actually by my husband and me, John Tiger, and David Shue. And it started after Walnut Street. We always go out for a beer or something to eat, and we're sitting there going, we gotta do something here, now we gotta do something. And so we kind of started it.
Yeah.
And it was pretty good. And then finally, people weren't doing anything. I think we were doing it for about 5 or 6 years, kind of getting it to go along. And then we said, okay, we had it. You guys decide what you want to do with it. And Kathy Evans took over. She's taken it from here to here. So it's pretty nice to see.
I live up Marshall.
Okay. You're in the Clemens.
They're in Springfield now.
Oh,
They moved to Springfield about 5 years ago.
okay.
We do a lot of this thing.
I've kind of been out of the circuit for a while, teaching at OTC, so I've been out of. Yeah, I'm familiar. I've been out of the show circuit for quite a while and just started getting into play again after I got 20-year hiatus.
Are you teaching play? at OTC?
Yeah. It's one of my students here.
You actually look familiar to me too.
Yeah, you look familiar to me too, and I'm not sure where I might have seen you.
I think I think I might have taken your class at OTC. Did you teach there like 10, 12 years ago?
Yeah, I've been there for about 13 years.
You teach like a art appreciation.
Yeah, art history, art dance.
I think I met my wife in your class.
Oh, how sweet.
I'm serious. I think I did. What's your name?
Pardon?
What was your name again?
Kathy Clemens.
Yeah, you're my teacher.
That was it? How you remembered it? You know, students don't remember your name even when it says there.
No, it was funny. I was at OTC for a few years, and I was getting my associate's degree. I think it was in networking or something along those lines, and I hated it. And somebody made a joke in class that was like a programming joke, and I was like, you know what? That is really not funny. And everybody was laughing. I was like, I am in the wrong place. And so I actually dropped all my classes, and I took your class that year, because I was like, I need to get back into some art, I need to start thinking about that. I always like to paint and draw and those things. So I need to make something that makes me happy, in life. And my wife was taking that class too. And we met near class, and we both became artists. We both went to Missouri State and started making work.
Thank you so much.
Now, it wasn't all you, but yes, I was in your class. Now this pot here, I'm very unhappy with. I just do not care for it much at all. So at the moment, I'm just trying to figure out something to do with it. It's not doing what I wanted to do with it. I think I got too interested in what we were talking about, and a little less interested in what I was doing at the moment, and kind of let my hands just take over. So I'm just going to have some fun with it. And this is not really a traditional Jeffrey form, even though it's, there's nothing wrong with it. I tend to have it come out and then back in and back up into a smaller opening, and then I'll beat it around a little bit. I'm still going to beat it around, but we'll see what we do. It is very interesting to see you again. That's very cool.
Thank you.
That
Good to see you.
Yeah.
You did look familiar, but after 13 years or so.
Oh yeah, it's probably more than that, to be honest. It's let's see, when was that? I graduated in 2006, so I was at OTC in 2003, maybe. It's hard to say.
Okay.
It's been a while though.
Yeah. I've been full-time for 10 years and 3 or 4 years before that.
I think I took my best artistic courses at OTC.
Really?
Yeah. I took a humanities there that was non-art, but it was all art. It was great.
Yeah.
It's funny how small the art world is. One of the professors at KU always preached that to not and he's just like, artists, so giving, and it's a small, tight group.
Yeah. Seems like they all said something like that to me. Swindell and Burke said that too. It's like, the people that you meet and the conversations that you have here are the most important thing about grad school.
Oh, yeah, that's not the fitness of this.
Yeah.
It scares me.
I mean, I really don't like it. I can cut it in half, so it's not going to hurt my feelings. I'm sure it's a little thicker down on the bottom, but what would I?
Personally use that face for?
Well, this would be a vase. It should be something pretty to look at, or you can get those little flower things on the, put your flowers on the bouquets. I am concerned with function, but at the same time, sometimes I'm not. Bede Clark said that he doesn't make his pots for you guys to use. It makes to put on the shelf and look at. So I think, I don't necessarily think that. I like my pots to be used, but.
Were you at Springfield Pottery when we did that workshop?
I was the helper for Bede.
That's
So
probably.
I made his clay, and
Because I sat in front of him for 2 days.
I was so sick during that. I had just a horrible cold, but it was an amazing workshop.
Yeah.
I mean, the work that he's able to do, stretching those things, and Yeah. You see his cover on Ceramics Monthly this last summer. His work's so nice. Yeah, you do, but I think there's enough room. We all make good pots. We can all make good pots, you know. And some people make really good pots and get recognized for it. And some people make really good pots and don't, you know.
And some people don't make very good pots, but they're very happy doing pots.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And Bede makes really good pots. He makes really beautiful pots, and he decorates them in wonderful, wonderful ways. You know, he has the benefit of being a professor too, and the access to all those wonderful things.
So you would fire down at CLO?
I would fire it a whole lot down at CLO. I fired probably 20 kilns down there. I haven't fired them in years, but I was invited recently by Jeff to come do some work, but that hasn't really, you know, come to any fruition lately. I'm sure there's always tons of people that want to fire his kiln for him, you know.
The first year I fired there, they said, okay, we'll prove that you can't do a thing little thing. Your job is to climb in that kiln,
Who said this?
and clean it out. My job was to spend the first day just cleaning every bit of ash and making it spotless to prove that I was.
And you were capable? Who were you proving this to? Was this Keith or?
Oh, it was Keith.
Keith?
Chorus, what's his name? Carlos, from Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay. Pittsburgh, Kansas?
Yeah.
Malcolm?
What's his name?
Malcolm?
Malcolm,
Yeah.
Malcolm. And Jeff.
Yeah. I don't know Malcolm very well. I know of him, you know. And then we have Frank at
Yeah.
MSSU.
That Phoenix anymore, or does he participate at all?
You know, I don't, Frank doesn't really work much with us at all. He's kind of a, yeah, he's a little bit of a recluse. I was trying to find the right word that was, you know, because I've met him a couple times and he's nice, he's cordial and those things. But part of the reason the owner of Phoenix Fire Art opened that was because it was hard to get into classes at MSSU. And so there was a need for a community clay center. So when she did that, I wonder if he thought that in some way that we were competing. And so he's stepped foot in Phoenix twice since we've opened, which I think is a mistake.
Yeah. Clay people are good for working together.
Yeah. You know, we recently got through this big split at Phoenix where the people that were working there before me, okay, there's this big argument and they've branched off. And so there's actually 2 community clay centers in Joplin, which in a town that's smaller than Springfield, okay? So we're competing with them and we're competing with the university when, you know, in some cases we should all be working together. You know, you look at what like Marshall has been able to accomplish with the Lawrence Art Center and having those classes and those people in the community come out and fire humongous wood kilns and that sort of stuff. And that's what we all need to be sort of focusing on, is trying to establish clay as a part of the community instead of these little niches where, you know, and you know, I'm not trying to criticize Frank. I just, that's what it seems like to me. It's like, well, you know, we have to compete, so we can't be friends. And he is a friend though. You know, he puts up our posters for workshops. He donates time to the Indy Bowl. Sometimes he hasn't done it this year, but he does donate some time and students. And he doesn't have a very big program, so he has to be very protective of it, which is understandable. All right, so this one's working a lot better. I'm a lot happier with this one, even though I'm bumping around there a little bit. So when you get these sort of bumps and ridges, you got to come back and compress again and kind of push things back to where they should be. That's from torquing the clay. I'm putting too much pressure. It's too thick up on top.
How do a student will do that every time?
It's a twist.
You just threw that back down for Brent to fix it.
Yeah, you know, some people, I've seen some people, they'll go from the bottom up to the top and fix it. I was watching a video on Ken Ferguson, and you know, you throw this big pot, it's just wobbling all over, then go on the inside. straighten it right up again. Somebody showed me to go from the top to the bottom and then back up to the top on the inside with your rib, and that helps push that back out into a sort of curved form, which is stronger.
I just figured it was past the point of the period.
No, absolutely not. It's actually part of the process, because if you're throwing thin and you're putting all your pressure up here, so you have drag and friction and stuff up here, then naturally this clay down here is going to want to twist on you if it's thin enough. So when it does, it's just because it's losing a little compression, and you've got to come back in and, see, it's doing it again. So if I had to stop whenever that happens to all my pots, I wouldn't make any pots. It happens to almost all my pots. And maybe that's something that I'm doing wrong. I tend to notice it more when I get thin here and thick up here. So, but I'm always trying to leave this a little thicker up at top so I can do some fun things with it, like split the rim or beat it around a little bit. I also had a lot of problems in the beginning trying to get really thin down on the bottom. And down here, I found that most of my weight was in this area here. And how do you deal with that? Hello. How's it going?
I was watching a video on whatever. And they're very, really large goals. And it actually looked quite big at the bottom. And then took care of it in the trimming.
Yeah.
They're trimming a third of the thickness off.
Why make it hard on yourself if you?
Well, I was seeing that you take a piece of land out, but, well,
I saw something like got to go on one of those marvelous China tours for potters, and
Oh wow.
I watched them throw things like this, and all the clay in the bottom, and they would just dig their hands in like this, and pull the pot out of that bottom.
Uh-huh.
Oh, it's all gonna be trimmed down to it.
Yeah. So.
Maybe it was just their history.
Yeah, it's just the way every potter develops their own pattern.
And if you're working really large.
Yeah, I mean, these were big pots, and they just jammed their fingers, spread their fingers, jammed them in the bottom,
Yeah.
pulled them off, and put them aside.
Well,
One right after the other.
They should look like this.
No, I use all colors, lots and lots of circles designs.
Well, I think if you are making big pots, you have to leave them in. They can't all be paper thin, and to ask them to be that, you're just going to ask for failure. So there's nothing wrong with trimming, I think with trimming though, you're always wanting to echo the sort of the interior form, you really shape the inside to what you want and then trim the outside to the inside.
But I watched Japanese potters that trim the inside of the pot.
Really?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they would throw them pretty much the way they wanted them.
Uh-huh.
And they would do the last trimming on the inside to match the outside of the foot.
Huh.
So they trim the foot, and then they go back around, flip it over, and then trim the inside to perfection.
I'm going to say I've done it before, but I don't like to trim the inside of my pot. I feel like if I'm trimming the inside of my pot, then it's like I should have done that when I was on the wheel.
I should have done a better job first.
Throwing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I mean, I feel like anything that gets you results is a good thing. Whatever works for you, then great. But I tend not to trim the inside of my pots. Every now and again on a platter, there'll be like this one little area that I don't like. And if it has this bump, it's like the beginner's hump or something like that, I won't let that happen, and I will hide it. I will pull out a trimming tool, nobody's looking, and trim that off of there.
So after I saw this Japanese potter do it, then I thought, well, maybe it's not called cheating. The technique exactly that he had perfected.
Oh, sure. Somebody's happy in there. All right, so again, this is sort of a proto form. It's not really the final form. I'm going to come in and stretch some of that. I'm just trying to get the most out of my clay. There is extra on bottom, And that's fine. Let's see, here we go. So open that and do some stretching.
If you alter your sides so much, you really can't do a lot of trimming very far out.
Well, it depends. If you get thin enough, and if you alter it in the right place, when you do your trimming, you get these trimming lines. Okay, so instead of a circle that goes, concentric circle that goes all the way around, it goes like this. It bumps and moves around your pot. So you got to get used to trimming that way, but it can leave a very unique line on the bottom of your pots. So that's part of it. That's something that I'll have to probably show you guys tomorrow when I do some trimming. So I do beat it around, but I try to stretch it as far as I'm going to stretch it, and then I beat it up. And some of the marks that I put on will be after I trim it, I love bulbous forms, and maybe that's one of the reasons why I love a lot of those big bead pots. Those bulbous bead.
When you're gonna trim these tomorrow, you're gonna turn them over as not even as the top is, and you're gonna put them right on that bat and trim the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. That's where the way I divide them up, the way I beat them up. If you do it in a uniform manner, loosely uniform, then the flow of the rim should be somewhat uniform also. Like if you look at some of these, you'll see a flow, and it should touch on either 3 or 4 sides, which should be enough to trim. So my boss, I threw a bunch of empty bowls. She's like, "Do you want me to trim those while you're gone?" And I was like, "If you do, you're gonna have a hard time." So it's something you kind of got to get used to, allowing your trimming tool to move and yet making a clean, nice mark. Okay, so about done with this one. Close that off a little bit. Make another pull. There we go. Maybe do a split rim on this one. Get some lines on it. If you notice, I get pretty dirty, so I always wear towels. Otherwise, I wear a lot of clay. I've started thinking about that a lot lately because I have a baby at home, so you don't want to wear a lot of clay and go home and hug your baby. So, all right, so there's my split rim. And I don't know if you can see that or not. Can you see that? Let me sort of see it there. Now I'll put some lines on the side of this pot. It's going to help whenever I bump it around, sort of bend those lines and describe the form a little bit. And so now we'll add some pokes. Okay, so 1, 2, 3. This will be a waltzing pot. I'll do another one. 1, 2, 3. All right, so what I did was I took a round form, and when I poke it 3 times, that turns it into somewhat of a triangle. On the inside, there's a triangle form that you can see. And then on the top, that also turns it into a triangular form. So I like that transition from something that goes round into a triangular or a trefoil. Okay, trefoil is a word that I like to use for that. And what I'll do, I don't know if you can see it. Yeah, you should look at it whenever it's over there. But I'll put a handle here, I'll put another handle here, and another handle here to continue with that sort of base 3 theme that I use. All right. There we go. It's not the thinnest that I've ever thrown. Honestly, there's a lot of weight on the bottom that I'll take off. to make it nice and thin.
Jeffrey, how important would you say line is in clay work?
Line.
Line.
Like putting a line on something. I think it's just very important. It depends on what you want to do with it. You know, you can make a pot, you know, exceptionally smooth and burnished, and then you allow for the terracage or whatever it is that you're putting on it to do the interesting effects, you know, or the glaze, you know. But lines, they help helps the glaze sit on your pots, and it helps describe those pots. And so it depends on what kind of glaze you use. If you use something that's real thick that has a, you know, heavy opacity, then you may never see your lines. But it's always going to affect the way that glaze sits on it. So I think it's very important, and it depends on, I think, your goals too for your pots. You know, if you want, you know, just like those lines on that top part of the vase, you know, after I put the lines on, that's a descriptive part of that top section, okay? And then you come back in and you tap it with your rib, and you poke it in such a way so then it bends the line, and it becomes a contour line, just like when you're drawing. So it's a description of a curve. So I would say that it's very important. So, and then, you know, afterwards I'll come back, when I do my trimming, I'll put lots of lines on there also. You know, trimming's another chance to, you know, some people trim everything really smooth. I trim things, and sometimes with my trimming tool, I go like this, up and down the side of my pots, and what that does is it creates a line that moves. And I love it when it spins. When you put a line on it, and you take a trimming tool and you trim, you go all the way up the side of your pot, real slow, and then all the way back down. And you watch that, and that line just, you know, curves up and down. I mean, I think it's sensuous, it's beautiful, it's a great thing. So it depends ultimately what you're doing, though. You know, because lines and, you know, bumps and those things are going to dictate how your glaze sits on that pot. So if you want the glaze to really flow and move down, if you put a bunch of throwing rings on it, it's going to affect how that's going to flow, which is a good thing and a bad thing, depending on what you're doing. For me, I put them down at the bottom a lot because I use these really running glazes, and so they run down and then they hit those marks and they go, okay, I'm going to slow down a little bit, you know. I always put a big foot ring on things too, so I use very running glazes. What am I making here? I'll make a mug. Anybody want to see anything in particular? Don't be afraid. It's all right.
You have a lot of good beginners, which is really
Okay. All right.
Any advice as if you just started?
Okay. Well, I'm going to throw in a mug right now. Okay. And so for beginners, for my beginners, I sort of try to explain it I try to simplify it into 3 different parts. And the first one is centering, the second one is opening, and the third one is pulling. And I think pulling is sort of the wrong word because you're not really pulling. You're not grabbing something and lifting it up. You know, you're actually pressing your fingers in a way that displaces the clay upwards. Okay, it's not really pulling. So I'm going to make my pull, and I'll back up. I'll throw another mug and slow down a little bit. I start with 2 forms for my beginners, a bowl and a cup. And I start with a cylinder to start with, and a cylinder can be lots of things, okay? So a cylinder as a cup, you know, it's something that's like this, all right? A cylinder as a bowl is something that looks like this. It was like this, you've just tipped it outwards. It's a flat bottom bowl. If you open it even further, it can be a plate or a platter, okay? So it's still a cylinder, it's got a 90-degree angle that you tip over, okay? Then I talk about round and spherical forms, you know, hemispherical forms, ones that require a foot ring. This will be a mug. Just jumps right up there. Take it out a little bit. This clay is a little bit buttery, a little bit more buttery than what I'm used to, but I like it. It's really nice. I usually use a little bit of grog in my clay. So if you're having trouble with like weight on your mugs, on your cylinders, and down low, most of the time that's where everybody's problem is. It's right in here in this neighborhood. You have to spend a little bit more time down at the bottom, pressing into that inner finger with your rib. That really moves that up. And then before I'm done and ready to shape this, I'll actually come in with my knife and I'll push out on the inside right here and cut off some of that extra clay that I can't get up in the air. And you're really trying to fight gravity, and sometimes it's just impossible once you've got a tall form up there to get any more out of it. So just cut it off. Okay, so that's a cup. It's kind of an all right cup. It can be fired and it will hold water, but you can do some other things to it to make it more interesting. I've been playing a lot with different forms lately. I got, I think, stuck for about a year making the same things over and over and over again. And I get really bored with that. So I'm trying to sort of get out of my box a little bit. And, instead of just throwing this, I'll throw one like this, or I'll throw one that comes in and out, or I'll throw one that just goes in with a foot ring and then out. I'll try some different things. And so this is going to be a mug, if I can get it to work right, that I think sort of resembles a bullet shell casing, kind of comes up and in a little bit. And I started throwing these travel mugs for a while, and I sold them. Sold almost every single one of them. Everybody loved them. But I didn't really much care for them because I didn't like the form. I'm really weird about that. There's some things that sell that I just hate making. And my boss is always like, you need to make a ton of those. And I'm like, God, I don't want to make a ton of them. So I think there's a balance there.
What's the thinnest you ever throw?
The thinnest I ever throw? Sometimes as thin as I can get it, especially with porcelain. I try to throw porcelain as thin as I can get it, because that's where the real beauty is with porcelain is whenever you can get it to go translucent, put those clear glazes on there. And I like it when people pick up my pots and go, now a couple of them over there are chunkers. So. But I like it when people pick up my pots and kind of go, whoa, wow, I didn't expect that. That thing that that has so much volume to it to be so thin. So I enjoy that aspect of it. I get it as thin as I can, and that can create problems sometimes with glazing. You sometimes have to glaze, with as many glazes as I put on pots, you have to glaze one day and then come back and glaze the next day. And sometimes you come back and glaze the next day and hope it all stays on there. Takes.
Are you throwing red earth?
Am I throwing what?
Red earth?
Red earthenware. This is an L&R clay body. This is deep red. And it does have the consistency of porcelain. It is very smooth. And I might actually, it's all right. Hey, might actually switch to the brown here, see if it has a little bit more tooth to it. Because it's a little buttery for what I like. So this next bag that I get into, I'm probably going to try the Cone 6 brown. I normally throw, oh, look at that. I normally throw Cone 10 stoneware from either L&R, which is Scott's body. It's a dark red body. Or I throw stoneware from Laguna. We're a distributor for Laguna, so I get their clay too. And their clay is actually better than L&R's. It's a lot better. Some of it. California and Ohio. You have to pay for shipping and those things, so it's, and of course we all want to shop local, but L&R has some problems with its clays, in my opinion. And I like L&R, and I've known tons of people that work there over the years. Man, I'm really messing this one up. So But
Want some brown? That should be all be red.
yeah, I might just try the brown and see how different it is.
It's got more rock than the brown.
Does it?
Water, fresh water.
I could probably make it for a little while longer. But yeah, I think I'm gonna try this brown. I can go over for beginners, like sort of a step-by-step process if you want. Oh yeah, it's not fresh water. I need to spill it out. Just fill it up? Yeah. I bet this L&R plate, the red might be really good for throwing off the hump. Do lots of fun, pull the T-bills off of that. So I might do some of that.
My constable showed it. It's 13.
What's the difference between the clay that you're using now and the one that we're in the back already?
The one I changed to,
Yeah.
supposedly this has more rock in it, or more sand, which is gonna give it a little bit less of a buttery texture. This red is very, very smooth. It's very, very smooth. I don't mind it, but for some of the things that I do, it may not be appropriate, because I like to bend things a lot. So it'll have a little bit more strength right after I throw it. So we'll see. This looks actually a lot like this guy's bucket, so I'm actually pretty happy with that. Let's do some T-bills.
Which one, top off?
That's kind of funny. It's a funny question. It's not a funny question, but it's more, I've got some answers. When I was younger, when I first started throwing, I used to try to throw these huge pots. And I didn't know how to throw huge pots, but I tried. And so I had clay, and I'd pay the clay fee, and my teachers would make all this clay, and I'd go just grab 25 pounds of it, put it on there, and see what I could do with it, which was nothing. Could not do much. I'd get it up there, and then sometimes it would get wobbly, and then it would spin, and all of a sudden it would smack me every now and again. You'd get hit by a 25-pound block of clay up in the air. And the other thing that it did was it hurt my wrist. And to this day, I still have wrist problems from being a young thrower. And because I didn't know how to put pressure on it the right way. And so you have to work up to it, I think, as far as throwing big pots. There's something to be said for a big pot, but a big pot is also a commitment, because it's like, a mug's a mug, but how are you going to glaze this huge pot? And it's got to be beautiful too, because it's, got this huge canvas that you have to work with. So, it is a commitment, in my opinion. So when I build big pots, they sit around most of the time for 3 or 4 months until I can figure out how I'm going to give the pot its due diligence, I tend to keep my pots under 10 pounds. And some of that is because of my wrist and my thumb. This thumb, from opening a lot, hurts really bad. Hurts just from squeezing. So I'm trying to figure out ways to work around that. And eventually I'm probably going to have some form of carpal tunnel surgery. But and some of that is from cooking, because I ran restaurants for years and years. And some of that's from edging. Some of that's from throwing. So, oh, yeah, that's a great thing to talk about. Okay. So the first thing you should do, and I didn't do it, was while it's still in the bag, take the bag of clay and beat it on the ground. Okay, so drop it. Here, I'll just show you real quick. Cool thing about clay is that you got all these particles, and after they sit for a while, they sort of collect and they're kind of hard. Right? So if you take your clay bag and drop it like this, especially porcelain. Oh, that's all right. But that really softens it. Okay. So after you put that on your wheel, I don't wedge that. It hurts me to wedge that. I don't like to wedge that in clay, but I will cone it a whole lot on the wheel. So that sort of takes care of some of that for me.
And your smaller steps, we're counting twice, like this, either this maybe twice, and then something like this, how many times?
I cone most things 3 times. Yeah, and so, you know, if this is beat up a little bit, it's wobbly, how do you want this? I start by pressing down on it. So I press down on the sides until that's down all the way on the bottom. It's kind of gotten rid of this. Then I come in on the sides and start to press this up into a cone. I have one hand right in here and this other hand over here, and I'm balanced on my legs to keep myself very steady. So this isn't going to be a big pot. This is going to be a lot of little pots. Again, I'll throw maybe a big pot or two, and I may throw a sectional pot to where I put pots together tomorrow, you know. But I kind of feel like you can do more with smaller pots. For me, I can. The thing that interests me the most is the manipulation of the clay and the surface, and really refining the form. And so to do that on a large scale, you got to understand it, I think, in a smaller version first. And so for me, under 10 pounds is where I need to be. And if I get to where I'm throwing 20-pound pots, well, then great. But, you know, I'd like to understand it on a smaller version first. So these are going to be tea bowls. So if you haven't,
Do you mostly throw the tea bowls on top?
I throw all my tea bowls on the hump. So I'll start with a hump. And something that you should know about throwing on the hump is compression. And compression is a really big deal throughout ceramics in general. But normally when you're throwing, you have the wheel head down here to give yourself some compression when you're pressing against it. You don't have that up here, okay? So when you're opening, okay, on your hump, you have to sort of choke it. So keep your hand down up underneath it on the throat of it, and then you open down through. So when you're squeezing, you're pressing against the pressure of your hands, okay? Now the reason why I tell people this is because when people first start throwing off the hump, they have S cracks just all over the place. And that's from lack of compression. So if S cracks, okay. In the beginning, they can be caused by lots of things. So you throw your mug, maybe you worked on it a long time, maybe you used too much water, maybe it dried very fast, maybe you had thick and thin problems. But you get a crack in the middle that looks like an S, a curve, okay? And that comes from lack of compression. Right? It's sort of it's kind of like the beginner's hump. It's something that plagues beginners for a little bit. On the bottom of the pot. Yeah. I love throwing tea bowls. Tea bowls are just some of my favorite things to throw because they're just sort of a real quick sort of study almost, or a gesture of pots. They don't have to be big. They can be nice and small. And they're very intimate. As I say, I give a lot of them away to people I know and that I like that come to my shop that are part of my life. They're some of my favorite things to throw in. I think that if I could get a job like throwing one thing over and over and over again, it would be a T-bowl. So I could just throw them all day. And I love to glaze them. So this will be a summer style T-bowl. A little bumpy there. It's going to be a wide, low T-bowl. I'll do some other ones.
So when you're reaching in there, you're compressing, get the water out, you're compressing in the center.
I'm compressing and I'm shaping, so I'll come in and press down with my rib, and then I'll come in and shape with my rib on the outside. And I'm making little pulls, getting all the way up next to the base. I'll put some lines on this one. This one's about ready. It's interesting. I think I do different types of throwing depending on how many people are looking at me. So when I'm by myself, I really experiment and I don't concentrate so much on my pulls. I try to leave lots of lines. But when I'm teaching people, I try to show them the proper ways to do things. So I gotta get a little looser. Then I see some fun stuff.
But knowing the proper way to do things allows you to then do fun stuff.
Oh yeah, in order to get loose, you have to actually know the proper way. Otherwise, you just look like you got a weird-looking pot.
Otherwise, it's an awesome pot.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I take a really structured pot and then I knock it off center.
When we arrived from the high school, we were talking about split rim, and I see over there on Kelly have examples of different rims. Could you tell us a little bit about split rims?
Split rims. Split rims are a pain in the butt to trim, but they, the question Kathy asked was how important are lines? And it's a chance to put another line in your pot. Okay. And for me, because I bend those lines, especially I bend the lip a lot, it's very important because the lip will fluctuate. And so it draws attention to that line. And it also allows me, because I use fluid glazes and runny glazes, I use a lot of ash glazes. Okay, so I take wood ash and then I mix it with local clays that was dug up. And then I fire that up and I mix it with other glazes. And that sits down in those rims. And it looks very interesting. So yes, I'm a big believer in line and rims. Split rims are nice. What do I use to cut it? My needle tool. I'll show you again here on this one.
So a split rim is uneven, or is it
Here, let me show you real quick, okay? This one will be a T-bowl with a split rim, which I don't normally do, but you never know, this might be the basis for new work. Trying new things is a good thing, so I have to leave the lip a little thicker. I love throwing off the hump. It's just so freeing. If you need more clay, you just go down further. All right, so keep that a little thicker, Jeffrey. You can do it. So when you do a split rim, you have to have a pot that's not very wobbly. So I can get this on here. And then you take, you can use your knife. I generally use a rib. And I hold on to this. And I press right in the middle of that. This one's not working out very well. Might have to show you on a platter. I'll tell you what, I'll turn this into a tea bowl. And then with what's left of it, I'll throw a platter. I'll show you what I mean. All right, so to the young lady who asked how I get this off of there, I'm getting ready to do that. I don't know where I learned this either. This is something I think I just started doing. I might have seen somebody do it. It's hard to say where we pick things up from and where what we keep and what we absorb. But so these little pokes and divots that I put in it, because I use really runny glazes, that it's sort of the path of least resistance with my glazes. It's like water. When it runs down, it'll go into a peak or a valley and go around the peak. Okay, here we go. I'm cutting it off. So I try to find the bottom of my pot, which is right here. Then I go down a little bit further. And I start to slice through. And then once it stops spinning, I pick it up and then take it off. Yeah, I think I might need, I got enough room for this one. So this will be actually a very large platter.
How do you get wider bases for platters?
Wider bases for platters.
The wide bases.
Okay, wide bases. That's a good question. By the way, if you're throwing, depending on the way your wheel is spinning, if you put a towel, like if I put a towel on my right leg because it's spinning counterclockwise, most of this clay hits this leg, so you'll stay cleaner. Platters. Platters are more about pressing than making pulls. Of course, you have to center and keep things centered. So I cone to help work out all the inconsistencies of the clay. Coning does a lot of things. It helps distribute the plates that are in your clay. You know what I mean? There's not physical plates in there, but the fact that the clay particles on a molecular level, they actually look something like your hand. Okay, so they're flat. And they've got this little digit off to the side, okay, that I represent with my thumb. And that digit sort of controls the ionic charge of your clay, decides whether it wants to stick together or go apart. So if you use deflocculants or stuff like that for slip casting, that's what you're changing, is that ionic charge. But so if you have all this clay that you mixed, say you didn't buy your clay, you just had this solder or whatever it is, the old solder mixer, and you mixed your clay. So it's got a lot of air in it, doesn't have a lot of compression. All those particles are going all over the place. Well, it's like taking plates and throwing them into a box. They're not all going to stack up on each other. So wedging correctly and coning, what it does is it takes all those particles and packs them on top of each other, so you get a very strong, dense clay. Now, the other reason I cone quite a bit is to distribute moisture throughout my clay. Just because you buy a bag of clay from Illinois doesn't mean that it's got equal moisture throughout it. So, when you wedge, sometimes your clay sits there for a little bit, just like this stuff does. Stuff on the outside loses a little bit of moisture. So you cone it a little bit more to help distribute that. All right, so here's the platter. I'm going to press this down. And to get a wide base, it has to do with pressing. You're not trying to keep this a small bowl or a small ball of clay and then open it across. You're pressing it down. And as you press it, that clay displaces outwards. Okay, so I'm on top. If you notice, I kind of lean into it. I kick this foot backwards and start to press this down. I press this down until my thumb hurts. And then I switch to a different position. So, okay, it's a little bumpy, so right. So I'll come up a little bit if it's bumpy and press it back down. All right. So I could open there, and that would be the width of my platter, but I'm going to continue to push it outwards. So I like to, when I'm throwing platters, get rid of all this stuff on the side. I seem to think that if you lay clay over the top of that, you've got a lot of wetness down there, that it can't be good for it. So now I'm going to switch. So I was doing most of my stuff like this. Now I'm going to use this portion of my hand. I'm going to lay this on top, and I lock this into this hand. This hand's pressing inwards, so it doesn't out like this. Keeps it compressed, but this hand is pushing down through it. And that is, in essence, opening your clay and displacing it outwards. Okay, once I get it opened, there's a big old air bubble in there.
What's part of that? Yeah.
Well, normally I don't have any because, I use pugged clay. Air bubbles are all pulled out, but hey, I find a few every now and again. Wow. All right, so now I'm going to switch again from doing this to something that I'm still using this, but I'm sort of using like my fist. And I press this over, and it starts to push this clay down and out. This is where the width comes right here. It's pushing that clay down. When I do that, it pushes it outwards. So just like compressing your rim when you're throwing, you always have to come back and compress your rim. Even now, helps. Come back in. Wow, there is so much air under there. Sorry, guys. Yeah. Pushing that out. I'm fighting that air bubble still. I think I did that when I slapped it down. I think I slapped it down and trapped some air on the bottom of it, which is something I don't normally do. All right. So I've almost got it all the way out to as far as the wheel head, where the bat is. Does anybody know why they call them bats? I ask that question to everybody because somebody's eventually going to have an answer. I've looked it up on the internet, and I can't figure it out. They call them ribs. You know why they call them ribs? It used to be made of rib bones. Yeah. So compressing, continuing to push all that stuff over. So now my foot is going to be this big, and then I'll do just a slight pull off of that. So in essence, this is a big cylinder. It's got a flat bottom, and I've got this donut of clay over here that I can pull straight up and make it a big dog dish if I wanted to, and then lay it down and it'll be a platter. All right. On the bottom of this one, I try not to get too thin. I tend to get too thin lots of the time on my platters. So I try to leave about a ½ an inch, maybe a little bit less, and then I trim about half of that off. Because I like for my platters and my big forms to be just under 1/4 of an inch in thickness all the way throughout, or right around. I feel like if you're going to use a big form, it might beat up against something and you don't want it to break. Okay, so I'm going to take my sponge. This is something I've been doing recently, and instead of using my fingers over here to try to lift this up, I use a sponge or a chamois, and I get that right up next to that donut of clay, and then I press all that up, and then I turn into a pull. See that? So mostly pressing, just a couple little pulls. Set my rim. I want to do the split rim for you guys. I love the split rim. It's something that really, I love how it bends whenever I bend my pots. So I've been trying to find excuses to use it more often.
Another kind of red dot.
Just a regular rim, I would imagine. You can have a thin rim, you can have a thick rim, you can have a very defined rim. I guess it depends on what you're going for. Some people have the same thickness all the way throughout, like, maybe this bowl, but this bowl has a little bit more of a rounded lip on it, a little bit thicker of a lip. And those thicker lips, they hold up a little better. Okay, same thing with your feet. If you have a rounded foot and a rounded lip, if you're doing dishes, and tap it up against something, it's less likely to break than a thin or a sharp one. So that's about all I know about that. All right, so here I am. I'm ready to do my split rim. If you're going to do it, you gotta make sure you're not bumping around too much. This one's bumping around a little bit. You can see it's ever so slightly off, but I'll hold my fingers on either side, sort of pinch it. I start to drop that down through the middle of that and split that. That one's not working out very well. Try that again. Cut that off. I don't like that little bump there. There we go. I'm feeling better about it. Okay, so that split that rim. See that on there? And then I'll come back with my sponge and I round it and sort of press it back together. And so there's my line. Okay, and I'm going to add a lot more lines. Here's a big spiral in the middle. That can be kind of nice. Maybe there's a way I can continue with that spiral up the side. Probably lose some of that. And I use my ribs a lot right here. This is one of my favorite parts, is pressing that down, using the curvature of your rib. That's why they use rib bones, is because they were curved. You can shape pots with that. So setting that arch there, pressing that down. These will be wall hanging platters. I'll trim a foot into it. That way you'll be able to hang on a nail. Zoom tight. All right, so now let's do some bending. See, that's that line right there. When it bends, I find that to be fantastic. Bends all those lines that I put on there. it's a very exciting thing to me. So, and it helps me decorate and decide where all my marks are going on my pots. See, look at the way it fluctuates and bumps around now. It's really beautiful. Let's do it again. Let's do it again and again. So now it's become very flower-esque. Look at that spiral. That's nice. All right, here we go. Spin it, and it sort of sets down, right? So it's not as bumpy as it once was. So these get hard to cut, by the way. Once you get something this big, you have to keep your hands, very firmly and tightly around that wire. You have to run it through. And what I find myself doing a lot, I'll throw this beautiful platter, and then I'll go, okay, I'm done, and I cut like up through the foot. So that one side will be really thin, and the other side will be thick. And I'm like, oh, I just wasted that. Great, good job, different. All right, and the other thing I am is I'm very much an absent-minded potter. I lose my tools all the time. Some people are very clean, and I heard somebody talking about a production potter the other day, and they're like, oh yeah, they got to know where their tools are at all times. I guess I'm not one. All right, so if you can't cut it, and especially something this big, you'll have to sort of take off your splash pan. And so the key is to keep it really tight, keep your hands firmly on the wheel until you get all the way through. I've seen some people spin their wheels when they cut. I've never been very good at that. So I just go straight through. I either pull or I push.
Where did you learn to push your wires through? Most people pull the wires through.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know where I picked that up from. I don't. Go ahead.
I just watched a video, Denise was doing a workshop on teapots, and he talked about doing that. So he would always pull, and then he started, this guy showed him, watching him push, and he started doing that, and he said it's more control.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is. Maybe for me, it's just because my wire is, whenever I'm rolling it around, it's hard to time.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of wire around and pulling it, just
Yeah.
scoop up. So I don't know if I know the answer to that,
It's okay, I know.
but it's something that I do.
We thank you.
Oh, no problem. Thank you for coming. I really appreciate it, guys. It's always good when you get to throw for a room full of people. Oh, I can, yeah. Yeah, we can break. What time, let's make, up to you guys. I can throw for another 30 minutes. Go by it. See how many I can get done while you're gone.
Well, you sell money of your T-balls?
Yeah.
So we can buy them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, it is an honor to watch you as a production artist. That term is so crudely handled. I think that's mastery of what we're doing. I started out, you were talking about throwing off the hump. I started out in the early 70s in a pottery in Ohio, Sunbury, Ohio. And I apprenticed with these two women. And I had to throw 6,000 discs off the hump, then 6,000 T-bowls, then 6,000 rice bowls, then 6,000 bowls. I never got past the 6,000 discs because I was going to Ohio State at the time, in ceramic department. But I tell you, it taught me everything about control.
So much.
Throwing with your eyes closed, just let your hands do it. Emotions and it's done,
Yeah, I've got this thing where I call it, I'm kind of like looking through people. I don't really look at my clay. It's about feeling. I'm looking this way when I'm doing most of my centering and most of my work. And so, yeah, I call that the conversation. You've had this conversation. It's a tactile conversation. Okay, it happens. It's like reading Braille. Okay, I don't know how to read Braille, but I'm assuming that people that do, they touch things, it affects their brain, and they understand. So it's kind of a call and response. You know, you push on the clay, it does something, and you push on it a different way to get it to do something. It sometimes does this, and you have to react, whether it be shutting off your wheel or your hands or something. But it's still that process of I'm touching it, it's sending processes to my brain, and then I have to make a decision and send something back. So it's a conversation. It's very much what it is. And that conversation gets easier as you do it. And if you can sit down and throw 100, the things that you learn from sitting down and throwing 100 is an amazing thing. You know?
It's a symphony. It's just like, it's my zen time, throwing my rice bowls and tea bowls. And,
God, I love throwing bowls. Bowls are about my favorite thing to throw, to be honest. And tea bowls are just wonderful. And honestly, I always called my bowls sort of rice bowls. And then I looked at, I was looking at some historical forms and drawings, and then there was a name for it, and I looked it up and said, oh, it is a rice bowl. There it is. That's what I was doing.
I stayed in a little village called Chengdu in China, where the guys throw 400 rice bowls a day, and their wives sit out a day, just throw it. And their wives sit out in the courtyard and hand paint those 400 one right after the other. They paint them when they're wet.
Yeah.
Cobalt. Yeah, well, no, they wouldn't sell them to us. We got them out of the trash. We dug in salvage.
They wouldn't sell them to you.
No, they wouldn't sell them. They were all, like in production, and they load them, they tie them together in long strings with some straw and that pink nylon rope, and load them in golf carts and drive them over the hill down to the highway. And they won't sell them.
They won't sell them, David.
They're production.
Oh.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, that's an ultimate souvenir when you get to see it. Yeah. You have all the backstory on it.
Yeah, it's amazing. But it's really, you can't sit in front of a potter and not learn something. It doesn't matter.
No, you can't. And really, that's what these things are for, is to pick up all those little tricks of the trade and things that people do. Some lines on there, and then watch this. I love that action right there. Just that simple 1, 2, 3. There's the trefoil turning something round and spiral and form to something that's triangular. That's cool. I throw for a lot of high schoolers. In fact, and every month I throw on third Thursday down there, which is our art walk. So I go down and sit in the middle of Main Street.
Yeah, I saw it on the pictures.
Yeah, I've got the yellow line in between my feet.
And they think it looks so easy.
And they love it, man.
They're like, the thing with students is when you do it, they're, I can do that, I can do that. And then it's like sort of gratifying when they sit down and they do
That's incredible.
they fail.
I like doing it for little kids on art walk. You'll throw in the hump, you'll center it, you'll throw a cylinder, and they get to kind of like manipulate it, and they get to make something.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fun.
I said her did the little donut ring and I just tell her to just fingers in it.
We're working on our clay version of our version of the Playmobil, where we can start doing, an outreach program for kids.
It's funny because Platter was talking about making a foundry trailer so that Jacob, myself, and him can just rotate between schools, drop it off, and it's got a furnace, it's got sand.
Yeah, you should. It's those sort of things and those, grant-based work that, I think it really proves your worth to the community, in some ways. And somebody came in the other day, and it was, do you guys remember the Good Girl Art Gallery here? Okay, so Good Girl, that woman came in, and she was like, you look familiar. And I was like, oh, yeah, you look familiar too. So I haven't lived in Springfield for a long time. And she was like, well, I used to run that Good Girl Art Gallery. And I was like, oh, okay. I used to work for Nathan. And she was like, oh, yeah, I love Nathan. And she was like, you know what? That community is so blessed to have Nathan. Oh, man, I'm messing this board. I should start over. But they said that, the community was so lucky to have Nathan. And I worked for Nathan, and I worked on the Playmobil after he got it. I went to all these schools around here and worked for different teachers and, you know, started to understand like, you know, how to work for grants and how to make some of that money. But Nathan, you know, he's got a shop there where he's always got people coming to take classes from him. And if you have a community outreach program, you know, you're basically teaching tons of people in that community. If you teach kids, you're informing their parents that this is where you are. And come down to Phoenix Fire Art or Springfield Pottery and take a class, you know. And at the same time, you're helping people.
You're getting excited about art.
Huh?
You're getting excited about art.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I don't know. There's a lot of political things we can all talk about, but I think as artists, we can all agree that art is losing its foothold in our education system, shop class, and band, and all those things. When for me, they were the most important things, the things that taught me the most, you know. Just because you can take a test doesn't mean you're good at anything. So Keith always had this thing on the.
Do you recycle them? Do you want down my cans?
Cans we can't use, there's moisture and there's not much water. We'll take it from now. Aluminum frames. Anything extruded aluminum. Is the brown working a little better?
Yeah, it is. It is. I think I'm going to go back and forth. I think there's certain things that I can do with one and not the other. But yeah, I think the brown is actually, it's a little bit more like Scots, which is what I'm used to throwing most of the time, or white stoneware that I throw with. And I'm able to move it around a little bit more. It's not just pushing for the sake of pushing. Let's see if I can do this.
The earthenware is just very fragile. It doesn't vitrify, so it's. I mean, you can throw it. It's nice and smooth. I like using it for mold making because it's a great play for that. But I think it has a lot of talc in it. It's just
Earthenware most of the time does have a lot of talc in it. Most of your earthenware bodies are 50-50 ball clay and talc. It's actually an extremely cheap body to make. Yeah, so you open one bag, you open the other bag, you put them both together, and you're done. Yeah.
So is it gonna make it more
They charge the
fragile
same
for
thing.
daily use?
Huh?
Is it more fragile for daily use?
Well, talc's an interesting ingredient because it's what it is it's both a high fire flux and it's a low fire clay body. Okay, so if you use it in glazes above, I think 2,000 degrees, then that will help lower the temperature of other materials like silica and clay and those sorts of things. So if you get it up to, that's why whenever you put an earthenware clay body in a cone 10 kiln, it just melts and becomes a puddle. Okay, because at a certain temperature, talc becomes a flux. All right, and so talc is a clay body though. As long as you keep it under 2,000 degrees, maybe a little bit less than that. We're probably pushing it to 2,000. Probably gonna get pretty tight, but it's so cheap. There's so much of it. Same thing with ball clay. It's an incredibly cheap material. You put them together, you got a clay body that works. And so that's why it's one of the most used clay bodies ever out there. So,
Father say that if you want
very smooth.
you shouldn't use anything but contact.
If you want dinnerware, for me, you know, I'm a little biased. You know, I'm not biased against the way anybody works because, you know, there's beautiful clay out there. There's ways to make things vitrify. You know, Sunshine, we just had a workshop with Sunshine Cobb, and she fires to cone 3. Okay, and she fires a cone 6 clay body to cone 3, and she uses glazes that are 04 glazes. Okay, so she's up firing her 04 glazes and down firing her clay. Sometimes, she says, that they're not fully vitrified. And so everybody's like, oh, your clay's not vitrified. You know, so you guys know what vitrification is. Okay, okay, that's the ability for your clay to seal itself up and hold water. Okay, so terracotta, when you got your plant, you water your plants and it absorbs all that moisture. Okay, so it's not vitrified. It hasn't gone through that process of things getting really tight stone white. But so she wasn't necessarily having problems. But what she said was, she was like, so what? It's not vitrified. It's like there's pots out there for years, thousands of years that people have used that were not vitrified. And how you make them able to hold water is that you put a substance in it. What she uses coconut oil. She'll rub coconut oil on the inside of her pot, and then after that one rub, it works. It holds water. Okay. Before, they said a lot of the Japanese and the Chinese, they used rice water. Okay, so that starch that's in there helps seal up some of the pots.
I
So.
think it's for like the stone bakers, the baking stones.
Like a pizza cake, the
Like
pizza.
pizza stone, the oil of your food. You should be able to.
Yeah.
So it seals it.
Yeah,
Seals
yeah.
it. That's why you. What is that clay body?
It's hard to say. I don't know. Vitrification can happen at all sorts of different temperatures. It can happen even higher than cone 10. Lots of porcelain bodies won't get full vitrification until like cone 12 or 13. And depending on how much flux versus how much clay and silica are in your clay body, you may have a cone 10 clay body that is not vitrified after it comes out. So, it's the ratio of material that decides when your clay body, seals itself up. That's why we have cone 6 porcelains and those things, which I personally have never had any real luck with. I think they're porcelain, but they're not really porcelain.
Sunshine was, I was at the Women's Art Center, where she was demoing. She was talking about how she used some talc on the shelves, to kind of help things slide around. And lays everything down to the shelf. Like, oh, this will work great, Sometimes you put like rock onto the shelf. So
You put silica sand or something
Yeah.
like that.
And yeah, they have apparently brand new shelves too.
Everybody.
When I got inherited from my father, in Hollywood, were a bunch of unfired, well, they were fired, they're not glass, unglazed tile. And I want to remove my house shelves, so I put those tiles over. Something drips on a tile, so yeah.
I do that with broken kiln shelves. I'll put that under questionable stupid work. And there you go. I mean, it works great. You just throw it away with basically trashing with the kiln shelf. Do you guys have those silicone carbide shelves that are really thin?
Can't afford advanced shelves. I would love to, but they're like $200 a piece. $100 a piece.
Or if they're on like,
We can buy shelves that are an inch thick. The ones that we use for our guile, they're 16 by 16 and an inch thick. But we can buy them from Laguna in bulk for $10 a piece. Why would you buy a $70 kiln shelf when you can buy 7 of them for $10?
just you can fit more work.
You can fit more work in the kiln. So yeah, I guess that depends. For us, it's easier. I mean, if so many people glue stuff to the shelves. I use real thick kiln wash too. Kiln wash that flakes off because, I want when somebody's pot glues to my shelf, I want to just be able to grab it and lift it up and have all that kiln wash come off of it, instead of, so that saves their pot, it saves my shelf. Those advancer ones, they're,
You can't wash those.
yeah.
I was told you can't wash them.
Yeah, I think Vertashnik, you buy special wash for it if you do wash it. You have to, because we used to wash them. What's his name? Jimmy showed me how to wash them. You had to heat them up in the kilns, and then you had to use a special kiln wash and put them on there real quick. And when it did that, whenever you painted it on, it just evaporated off and dried really quickly. It was a real thin layer of kiln wash. So.
See, I want some for the electric kiln, just because those shelves just start to work so much.
You know what Nathan said about that? Just grind it and turn them over. Let them work back the other way. Yep. Yeah. That's where he. I mean, I apprenticed there for a couple of
I
years.
put them all over this.
Yeah.
Because you don't get kill a lot.
Yeah. Bend them back the other way. But yes, they do bend, and I have several ones that are bent too. And you know, that destroys work and all that stuff, you know. You put a big plate on a bent shelf and it comes out bent.
Yeah.
So,
What about all new shelves?
did you?
Yeah.
How'd that go? Did
It
they?
went okay. I had some working because I was hitting I was very close to my timeline.
Uh-huh.
The due date, so I had put 2 on shelf, so one side was get closer to the elements. I put them in the middle, kill them if I wanted to.
So did everything get there?
Yep, only had one break as they were packing up to ship it home.
Man.
And I don't know how that happened. I mean,
So what's gonna happen?
I'm supposed to get it Monday, I think. No, I'm gonna get rid of it.
So?
Although I have people who want to buy 8 place things.
Oh, so.
8 plus 7.
Individual places, there's a.
Place settings are difficult. They just are. I did have a good tip though from a guy that does make some pretty good plates. And he's sort of a self-taught potter, but I liked what he said about it. And he has bats that he has made, okay, that are cut to the shape of his plates. And so when he throws his plates, you know, he uses the same weight that he always uses. You know, it's measured, tested. And so he will throw his plate out to the end of this, and that's what he uses to mark it. Okay, so he has a dinner plate size and he has a smaller plate size. Instead of using that thing, you know, that sticks down here, you know, like that, or sitting there and measuring, you know, it's a real simple way to, you know, because it's hard to make, you know, 15 plates look the same, to be the same height, to be the same depth, to be the same thickness, to be this. I mean, it's hard. And we were up at that Lawrence symposium, and Chris Gustin was saying the same thing. He's like, I hate making dinner sets. It's like, he said he took a big commission one time where he had to do like a 16 person place setting, which would have been a nightmare. He said he worked on it for like months and then finally called him back and said, I'm not doing it.
The first time I used a scale to weigh out plays since undergrad.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't weigh my plays because I don't make the same thing. If I'm throwing cups, it's all thrown it's all hand size. If I'm throwing a large bowl, you know, I'll grab some clay, throw it in the wheel.
So when I saw yours online, they look so consistent. I wondered if you had made one and then made mold.
I should have. Unfortunately, I don't spend a lot of time with pottery. Enjoy it while you can. You have a limit on
The last one. I was sitting. I heard it. Oh, I know exactly what blue.
Oh, you hear something in the kiln pop? That,
Oh, and I knew exactly
the
what.
little.
Oh, I wanted to just cry.
I always know something's wrong when you hear that.
The custodian was in the room. What's the matter? Did you hear that? A little bit later, I heard another. He's like, oh, I heard that one. Oh, I know what that was too. I was pushing it. 2 more days and it would have been Brian.
Yes, can I paint the piece and then clear glaze over it?
Oh, lovely.
You can. you may not see any of the paint, but you can paint it if you want. It'll just burn out. Some paint will actually stay there. Have you look at the MSDSs, the manufacturer's sheets? Like if you look at Kills, okay? Kills is actually a glaze. Okay, you can use, yeah, it's the primer. A lot of those paints, they're heavy titanium based, Okay, so titanium is the pacifier that they use in a lot of things. And so they've got silica, they've got titanium. You know, sometimes they have a colorant from the paint, so it can actually make glazes. I fired some Kills pots, and they form these crazy crystals because of the heavy amount of titanium that's in the glaze. So, well, you know, I'm actually kind of lucky because I get to try things, you know, and me trying things makes things more interesting for my students, you know. So there's some pots over there, like those little porcelain ones that have copper wire that's dropped onto clear glaze, and that's what makes all this little like sort of.
I was wondering where those iron pots were coming from.
So
I like the glaze outside that's red-ish with some speckles, and so like something from the earth.
reddish with some okay, so it's probably a tomato red that you're talking about.
It's I'll show you. It's color red.
I'll mess this one up too. Sometimes I get more interested in talking than others.
I always love when students ask, can I glue it together and glaze it? No, I can't. Because they'll grab a handle or they'll have something and it breaks off.
Yeah, handles don't do well. Okay, yeah, that is a white stoneware, which that's one of the first ones I did like that. I've since then started using porcelain because I can get it to go transparent like the other ones. But that is copper wire that is hair thin. Very, very thin copper wire that I take scissors to it and I cut. And I cut it, keep it very, very thin and very small. And then after I dunk it in, well, the inside has a copper red on it. That's why it's able to turn red. That's copper. Okay, copper with the addition of tin at cone 10 will turn red. And that's what I was talking about earlier, something that somebody lost that we found again. Okay, so in order to get beautiful bright red bowls, like a cool red, like things that have some tones of blue in them, that's from copper at a very small amount of copper. If you use a lot more copper, it turns green. Okay. Yeah, you would think that it would, but copper in very small amounts, and you have to reduce. It has to be reduced. You can't. I say that, but there's ways around that too. In cone 6, you can also do copper reds, but you have to use silica carbide in your glaze. Silica carbide self-reduces. But you can do that red also in cone 6. It's a little bit harder to do. So
you put the copper wire on when the glaze is still wet?
Yep. You can do either, but what I think it looks better on the surface personally. I will dip it in. I use Elaine's Clear, which is Tom Coleman's wife's glaze, and
I have one of her pieces.
do you really? Yeah, those things are beautiful. Is it translucent, or is it one of the carved pieces?
I have about 2 cups. A set of cups, like the only set I have. I haven't held them up to light, but they're, I don't think they are. I want to say they're like a little bit.
I love Tom Coleman, but I use Elaine's Clear, which is her Celadon base, and then I dip it twice, and on my second dip, I just salt and pepper it on there. I just grab it with my fingers. And you don't want to put a whole lot on there. If you put a lot on there, then it turns black. If you put just a little bit, it'll turn red. So that's part of the experiment, though. It's like when I do that, you know, you guys have students, you know, that, you know, they're sort of like captive people. They come here for a degree, or they come here because they have to. You know, I have to like try to enroll my students and keep them, you know, keep them interested, recruit. And so I'm always trying fun stuff like, hey, look at this. I put kills on this. What did that do? but it's also a learning thing too, because you can go through and you can talk about the ingredients that are in glazes and talk about what they do and how they affect your pots, and that creates interest also. I have this girl that was a chemist, and she came in to start throwing because she liked the idea of throwing, but she's really become a glaze person because we talk about glazes all the time, and it is so fun. I love glazes. I used to not feel that way, but I didn't feel like my work ever worked very well with glazes, but now I just play and play and play, try different things. I'm a dipper. I'm not a sprayer.
I don't like spraying either, but I was just curious. I know James used to be a sprayer.
James comes down and hangs out with me every now and again. He'll
He's
come.
still in Kansas?
Yeah, he's still up in Lawrence. He'll come down for a couple weeks at a time though, and we'll put him up somewhere, and he'll work in the studio for a couple weeks. And yeah, his last batch of pots that went through, he sprayed every little bit, you know. And man, it takes all night. It takes forever. And I personally, you know, I like some of the things that happen with it, but I can do most of my stuff with dipping. And I do normally a base glaze. So I'll have a stable glaze on bottom, like the tomato red or Timaku or Shino's or those sort of things. And then I'll put ash or runny glazes on top of it. Okay, so the stable glaze, you know, sort of balances out the runny. It'll slow it down once it hits it a little bit. So I can dip, and then I put all this information, all this material up on the very top and let it sort of move its way down. Give it lots of room for it to run. So yeah, I love to play with glazes, but I do not like to spray very often. And I think the main reason is I don't like to clean the spray boot.
I always have trouble with the gun.
Guns always suck.
They always flow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. never cared for it whatsoever.
So quick.
I don't care for wearing a mask the entire time while I'm doing it. I mean, it just seems like a pain in the butt to me.
You don't have any prices on your work. What is the price of your small rice bowls, tea bowls?
Most of them are $25 or $35. You know, so I don't have prices on pretty much any of them. These are all ones that are fairly new that I just pulled off my table. But if you have one in particular, I'll just show it to me and I'll let you know what it is.
We're gonna take a quick lunch break.
Yeah, we should.
There's 1 o'clock or 5 till.
I gotta go too. Jeffrey has been great. Reconnected with you.
Yes, it has been.
Come on now.
Yeah, friend
That is so cool.
me on Facebook and say hello and
Okay,
keep in touch, okay? 'Cause,
All right, awesome.
you know, that was a good transition point in my life. And, you know, I'm glad I made that choice, even though I'm really broke and all these things.
Even though.
I said, even though I'm really broke, I'm really happy because I'm doing things that I love to do. You
Hey,
know?
you can be so proud of me and have lots of money and be miserable as all get out.
I know.
You work for jobs and be broken up to do this.
Absolutely.
So, anyway, that's.
So it's good to see you, Kathy.
Thank you.
I can't wait to tell my wife that. So I will let her know.
Yes, that's. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you all. It's been great chatting with you. Thanks. See you later.
You have to get back,
Thanks for having us. Everything done in one day. And you know, I never get sick. It's not only that I need to bank my sick days for myself, but as soon as I say that, I'll get like the black plague. And now that I've got Parker, I know that he's been sick for 3 weeks. He got the sinus jump and really not good. He turned 6 this week. You're just so amazing.
Yeah, I need to throw a couple of taller forms.
you need to do that when I get back.
Yeah, I'll go. I'm probably gonna go eat.
This one weekend, I heard the lanes kind of told on the look out of the told.
Show me what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's.
It's funny, the technical term like wonky.
Yeah.
Everybody knows what wonky
Yeah, exactly.
We call that unstable one, it's doing the hay vacuum. See where it was, yeah, probably in that.
Okay, now show me what you mean. I know that one.
See where it.
Oh, I know.